All right, we've got it taken care of. So if you are texting with folks at home that weren't able to use the link on tonight's meeting now works. We should be good to go. That's the good news. Bad news is we have to start all over again, but luckily that was a very short little bit, and we'll get right into it. So now I have to read that thing again. So hold with one more time.
All right. So are we, per our discussion, legal? Or do you want me to kick it completely, start over completely, like per Crystal?
Mr. Chair and staff, the prior record does still exist, and it's recommended that we just ask whether or not anybody currently online had any opposition to any of the items that were either deferred and or put onto consent, and that should be enough to preserve the record, in addition to that prior record that still exists for the beginning part of the meeting.
Okay, excellent. Sounds good. Thank you, Mary. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your patience. We're going to do a quick summary of how we got to this point here in the evening. So for those folks that have just joined us online, we had 2 items deferred to a later date. So item number 4 on our agenda is CVA 23-23. The project address there is 4809 West Albion Street. That project was deferred earlier in our meeting to our March 11th meeting. And item number 6 is CUP 23-59, Idaho Electric Signs at 5550 East Warm Springs Avenue. That item was also deferred to our March 11th meeting. So if you're online and you were hoping to testify on either of those items, please raise your hand. Okay, very good. So it looks like we have no one online that wanted to testify on either of those items, so the record can stand for those deferrals. Okay. And then along with those deferrals, we had one item approved on our consent agenda, and that was item number 7, that's CUP 23-78. The applicant was Dale Hope. The project address was 3901 South Curtis Road. Again, that item was approved on our consent agenda. For anybody that's online, if you were hoping to testify in opposition to that item, please raise your hand. Okay, no hands are up, so I believe that item can stand as well as approved on the consent agenda. So the good news now is that we can return to the top of our agenda and carry on with our evening, starting with item number 1, which is CAR 23-20 and CUP 23-57, Lombard Conrad Architects at 902 North 8th Street. The CAR is a modification to a development agreement to change allowed uses and site design on approximately 0.81 acres in an ROHDDA zone. And the CUP is a conditional use permit for a parking reduction and height exception on 0.65 acres in an ROHDDA zone. One item of note is that I will have to recuse myself from this item as my office. I'm an employee of the land group and we handled the site design for this particular application. So I'll be recusing myself and handing off the reins to Commissioner Blanchard to run this item. Chris, take it away.
Okay, so first up we have David Moser, staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Before I start, I would like to note that Richard Jarvis, the senior historic planner, is here if you have any questions regarding what historic preservation did last week. And with that, I will start my presentation. The site has a little bit of history. In 2017, a 4-story mixed-use building was approved for the property. The proposed building is similar in height to what is being proposed now, and it was rezoned to a residential office historic design review with a DA zone. However, the planning approval for the mixed-use project expired and was never constructed, but the property was rezoned. Therefore, the items before you tonight is a DA modification to change the use and the building design in the agreement and a conditional use permit for a height exception and parking reduction for property located at 902 North 8th Street. In addition, the Historic Preservation Commission heard this proposed development on January 29th and approved the project with a condition limiting the height to 45 feet. This condition was appealed, and the appeal will be heard before City Council at a future date. Therefore, the Historic Preservation decision with the height limitation is not final as of yet. As such, you can see from the vicinity map, the site is located on a small commercial intersection at the edge of the North End neighborhood. The surrounding area is served by bus routes and bikeways. This includes the 8th Street bikeway located adjacent to the property. To support the parking, the applicant is proposing an off-site parking lot, which is located about 230 feet away from the site at the corner of 8th and Hayes Street, marked here in blue, across from the cathedral. The proposed changes to the development agreement are limited to Section 3 and Exhibit B. The modifications include changing the wording in Section 3 to what is listed here on this slide and updating Exhibit B. Please note that Section 3 of the DA allows for commercial uses, which include office, retail, and/or restaurants, and the RO zone allows for office uses. As seen on the site plan, the building is oriented to Fort Street and 8th Streets, with Cunningham Place along the back of the building. Cunningham Place functions as an alley, and there is a surface parking lot on the other side of the alley adjacent to the building. The office will employ 35 people and includes conference rooms of various sizes, small kitchen, break space, and a small chapel on the 3rd floor, in addition to the standard office space. The conference rooms are intended to host diocese-related activities. These events will generally occur outside of normal business hours. And in this way, the off-site parking lot would be available for these events. These events will only occur or only happen a few times a year. The floor area of the building has been adjusted from 23,000 to 20,000 square feet since the original floor area calculation in the application included balconies, which are not considered living space. The project design provides 50 on-site parking spaces, which are located in an underground parking lot and on the surface parking lot. And there are 67 spaces are required based on the new floor area. Therefore, a parking reduction is required. To support the parking reduction, the applicant is proposing a shared parking agreement for the use of the surface parking lot across 8th Street from the cathedral. The surface parking lot contains 50 spaces. Its use is currently being shared between the cathedral and the school. Also, to support the parking reduction, I would note that the property and the adjacent neighborhood is served by 3 bus routes with bus stops in easy walking distance from the site. There are also several main bike route or bikeways through this neighborhood. And to promote a more pedestrian and bike uses, additional bike parking for a total of 16 will be installed on site. The site is also located close to the downtown neighborhood. And once again, as you can see, the off-site parking lot is here in blue. The height of the 3-story office building ranges from approximately 52 to 57 to the midline of the roof, and the height exception is required since the RO zone has a maximum height of 45 feet when adjacent to a single-family house, and there is one adjacent to the north. It is understood that the Historic Preservation Commission limited the height to 45 feet, but this condition was appealed, and I'll also note that the HPC's or Historic Preservation Commission is using different criteria from what the conditional use requires to base their decision on. Furthermore, there are several buildings within a quarter mile of the site that range in height from 3 to 7 stories. In addition, the building is pushed forward to the street frontage and steps down to 2 stories along Cunningham Place, which will create a transition between the taller portion of the building and the adjacent residential neighborhood. The planning team did receive several letters from neighbors and the neighborhood association expressing concerns of the proposed project. A summary of these concerns are listed here. First, the neighbors and the neighborhood association believe that the DA should be terminated and rezoned back to the original R2 HD zone. It is their belief that the applicant has defaulted on the conditions of the DA. However, Section 7 of the DA allows for several remedies for this situation, which includes requesting a modification of the agreement to City Council, which is what the applicant is doing. Second concern is that the building is too high. I would just note that the planning team supports the height exception for the reasons as stated in the project report. The third concern is with the proposed use. The neighbor and the neighborhood association believe the office is not appropriate use and it should be a mixed-use residential development. I would generally agree with him. However, that is not the city's decision to make. And the applicant is proposing an office which is allowed in the residential office zone and also allowed within the DA. The neighbor's other concerns regarding this is that the building will be used as an event center or a church, since the floor plans seen here contain large conference rooms and training rooms. And it should be noted that these spaces are to be used only for diocese-related or diocese office-related activities only, and that there is plenty of assembly space located within the church, the cathedral, and the school across the way for them to have their own functions, and will not be using this. Finally, there are other concerns regarding the impacts associated with the parking reduction. To address these concerns, I will note that the site is providing 50 off-street parking spaces for approximately 35 employees, and other events will happen only a few times a year when the off-site parking spaces will be available on the off-site parking lot. The planning team supports the parking reduction for the reasons stated in the project report. So in summary, the project complies with all the required findings to support the DA modification and the conditional use for the height exception and parking reduction, and the planning team recommends approval. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Next up, we have the applicant, and we've agreed to give the applicant 15 minutes to present on this. That means whoever is presenting for the neighborhood association will have the same amount of time. And we just need your name and address for the record to start. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, my name is Christian Welp, and I live at 11778 West Tioga Street, Boise. I'm the Director of Special Projects for the Catholic Church, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. A little vision on the building. The Catholic Church, as we all know, has been around for a long time. It has a rich architectural heritage as seen in places like Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris or St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It is also seen in a smaller way in St. John's Cathedral here in Boise. They are designed and built with materials that stay on the test of time. However, we didn't want a building that just looked old because we are not just a church of the past. We are growing every day here in Idaho. Young families are having children, people are moving here, and people are joining the church at Easter every year. Because of this, we set out to design a building that reflected our ancient tradition, yet one that is moving into the future. We did not just want a building that looked exactly like St. John's. We wanted to reflect that look, the physical and spiritual connection, yet a structure that points to the future, one that has modern elements. We did this by incorporating sandstone and brick, materials that are timeless and of high quality, and at the same time opening up to the use of glass, using symmetry and step downs in elevation that are more modern. The exterior beauty of the building is also reflected inside. We believe in creating a physical atmosphere where people want to come to work. The building we are in now, we utilize about 20,000 square feet. In this new space, we set out to create an environment where people want to be by letting in as much natural light as possible, by primarily having individual offices instead of only cubicles, and having views on both sides of the building. We have created an inviting place to work. Lastly, I wanted to briefly speak to the location. Why this spot? Very simply, it is common for the administrative headquarters of the diocese to be located next to or near the cathedral, which is where the bishop of the diocese is the pastor. Thank you very much.
Just a quick point of order. I think they started with 10 minutes.
I noted that too, Ms. Nelson.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
And just your name and address for the record. Thanks.
Thank you. Deborah Nelson. My address is 601 West Bannock Street. And there's additional members of our team here, including the project applicant, Lombard Conrad, that are here and available to answer your questions as well. So as David highlighted, we've got 3 applications that we need for this project. First, regarding the certificate of appropriateness. In addition to what David noted, I would also recognize that the Historic Commission staff did support the building as presented, with the height exception as being consistent with the design guidelines. And so we will, again, take up that one height limit to the council, and that's not final yet. And the 2 applications that bring us here this evening, with the conditional use permit and the development agreement modification that David summarized well, we just note that we are in agreement with the staff report, their findings, and all of the conditions of approval for both applications. So this slide shows a comparison to the prior approval for the Metro, which wasn't built. The floors are taller in non-residential buildings than in residential, so the 3-story chancery is comparable to the 4-story Metro in height. Note that on this slide, the square footage, to make it a more direct comparison for the Metro, that should be 54,000 to not include the garage. The Metro was more of a large box that went deeper, extended deeper back into the site without step downs. But regardless, the front facades and the heights are similar between the buildings. The Metro was approved for a height of 48 feet 11 inches, which is comparable to the main facade of the Chancery at 44 feet 8 inches, and to the midpoint of the main roof of the Chancery at 50 foot 7 inches. The Chancery has additional height, as you can see at the corner, to activate the corner, create a striking entrance, and add to that roof line variation. And it's that corner feature that really has the controlling higher height here. Under city code, it would be the midpoint of the highest point of that roof at 57 feet 6 inches. You can see that roof line variation here, as well as the different facade treatments to lessen the mass of the building and the step downs in all directions, especially toward the rear. And that rear is really illustrated here in this rendering to show that step down and transition to the neighborhood behind us, particularly to the single-story office building to our north and to the one single-family home located back behind the parking lot, which, as David noted, is the only structure that is triggering the need for a height exception. There is no adjacent zone that triggers it. Otherwise, the height limit for this building would be 65 feet, not 45 feet. And it is worth noting that that one single home is owned by the diocese, who uses the house to host priests. And so that homeowner is clearly supportive of the project height. The height that's added by the sloped roof above that lower facade serves the important function of screening the large mechanical systems on the roof. It also adds aesthetic qualities, of course, mirroring the roof of other historic buildings in the area. It's designed consistent with the roof pitch of 8 to 12 called for in the design guidelines, and it's proposed in a beautiful slate material. Looking at the site context, this is the northeast corner of 8th and Fort Street, where the site is currently shown as vacant, and it is vacant now. The proposed height of the building is appropriate based on this site context, which includes a mix of buildings heights and a mix of uses, including several taller buildings. As you can see at this corner, the current vacant project site and the office building to our immediate north, which is in a commercial zone, then a 3-story brick apartment building to the north of that. Adjacent to our east along Fort Street is the 7-story Capitol Plaza apartment building, and then several single-family residences. On the northwest corner is strip commercial along both 8th and Fort Streets, and behind that is the Boise Co-op. On the southwest corner is the St. Joe's School building that runs the entire block. On the south side of Fort Street, behind that is the historic St. John's Cathedral. On the southeast corner, there's a fuel and convenience store, which is adjacent to the Lutheran Church on the south side of Fort Street. And south along 8th Street is the parking lot owned by the diocese that will serve this use along with the cathedral and school. One block from the project to the east is the federal building and courthouse. To the south along 8th Street, there are a variety of office buildings along the west side that range up to 4 stories. In this diagram with building elevations of significant area buildings, you can see the Chancery is appropriately within the range of surrounding buildings in terms of height, facade length, massing, and footprint. This aerial also illustrates the proposed building in that context. To the east, you can see the 7-story, 73-foot tall Capitol Plaza apartment building and the 6-story, 103-foot tall federal courthouse. South along North 8th, you can see the 81-foot tall St. John's Cathedral. So for all of these reasons, and as described in the staff report, we would ask your approval of the height exception as meeting the city code standards and being appropriate in this area. Turning to the parking reduction at 20,000 square feet of interior gross floor area in an office, for an office use, the city code requires 67 parking spaces, which is 1 per 300 square feet. The Chancery offices will provide 50 new on-site parking spaces, 31 in an underground garage, access from a private lane at the rear of the building, and 19 in the rear on surface lots hidden from the public street view. The 50 on-site spaces are sufficient to accommodate the diocese's 35 employees and up to 15 visitors for day-to-day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 operations. The 50 on-site spaces will also be available and sufficient to serve trainings or similar gatherings at the Chancery office that are scheduled outside of the workday hours. The building is also served by close transit, supports pedestrian and bike access with increased bike parking, and it provides employment within walking distance to many residences. These factors alone support an on-site parking reduction, but the diocese also owns another 50 parking spaces less than a block from the Chancery at 8th and Hayes, bringing the total parking available to serve the Chancery to 100 spaces. The diocese allows St. Joseph's School and St. John's Cathedral to use that Hayes Street parking lot during the school hours and during morning masses at the church and for special events. You can see here through some of that activity. During normal weekday hours, the Hayes Street lot has extra capacity. These photos are from last Thursday and illustrate morning drop-off during weekly morning mass, midday before lunch recess, and after school pickup, and after work hours without a special event. It is empty. The diocese will be sure to schedule any activities at the Chancery office building that require use of this parking lot outside of school hours and morning masses and around any special or school or church events. And this is documented in a parking agreement that will be attached as an exhibit to the development agreement. The North End Neighborhood Association has questioned whether the Chancery office building is really intended to be an event center and then would need more parking. This is not the case. The Chancery building will serve as the main offices for the diocese, which are currently located on Federal Way in a similarly sized space and will be relocated here. The Chancery office uses include space for the diocese's 35 employees, including standard conference rooms and gathering spaces in an office building and a small chapel for daily worship by the employees. Additionally, the diocese conducts occasional after-hours training events in their offices and up to 2 priest retreats per year with an expected attendance of 40 to 50 people. These events will be in the more public-facing portions of the building on the first floor, which includes a multipurpose room, 2 classrooms, and a small conference room, and that's what's illustrated here. Using life safety occupancy calculations rather than design capacities or intended use, Nina has suggested that there will be over 400 people in the building at one time. This is simply not accurate. As designed, the maximum occupant loading of the first floor assembly spaces is 202 occupants. This is still far more than the diocese's expected use here based on their current actual experience. They anticipate approximately 50 people at a time and only during the after hours time so they do not overlap with normal employee working hours. The Chancery building is not intended for hosting school or church events, which both already have their own much larger assembly areas. And more importantly, for our purposes here and for your decision, is how this relates to parking. And just like every other office building in town, under your city code, parking is determined based on the square feet of space, not maximum occupancy. Under the city code, the primary use, here office, controls the parking calculation, requiring 1 space for every 300 square foot of office. That is why we are required to provide 67 spaces, which we propose to do with 50 on-site spaces and another 50 off-site spaces. And just for context, as illustrated on the slide, even if the city's parking calculation did consider these secondary assembly areas, under an event center parking metric at 1 space for every 250 square feet, 12 spaces would be required to serve the after-hour events instead of 10, all of which easily fit within the 50 on-site spaces available in the evenings. The Chancery Building is designed to be compatible with the surrounding buildings and uses with quality materials to be a lasting, sustainable part of the neighborhood. The exterior materials, sandstone and brick, are locally available. The walls exceed minimum insulative values. The windows have insulated glazing that meets or exceeds minimum requirements for solar heat gain. All occupants have access to daylight and views, contributing to a healthy work environment. The streetscape improvements are visually appealing, pedestrian-friendly, and improves the tree canopy in this area. The landscaping uses drought-resistant and native plants. The building meets city energy requirements and includes mechanical systems to be geothermal ready. For all of these reasons, we request your approval of the conditional use permit for a height exception and parking reduction consistent with the findings and conditions in the staff report. And we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Appreciate that. Next up, we will have a representative from the Neighborhood Association. It looks like we were at about 11 minutes and 30 seconds, so I'll allow that. Oh, did you? Okay. Okay, then we'll allow you the 15 minutes. And just your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Commissioners. Eric Hagan, Nina, President and Planning and Zoning Chair. My address is 809 North 18th Street. I have a presentation. Oh, it's there. Okay, sorry, I was looking over there. Is the clock going to go up there so I can follow along? Where do I start? Well, with the development agreement. The CAR is asking for a modification of the development agreement. Following the process in 110304 on the city's zoning code, the process is for a specific project, for a specific user, for a specific owner to build a specific project. The process, as it's illustrated, makes it look like it is for one project by a specific user for a specific project. These snippets are from the development agreement that was put together between the city and Dave Southers, the previous owner of the property, back when he was proposing to do a mixed-use project. I've highlighted sections that I can't see from here, so hopefully you guys can see, that cover all the different requirements as to the conditional rezone of the property from R2 to RO. Addressing the development agreement for a specific purpose. Addressing, is there any way we can get that enlarged so I can actually read it? Yeah, like full screen. Can you go full screen? Sorry, I got it called up on my phone here. All right, the agreement and the conditional rezone permits all uses in the RO zone. It says this project is for residential, comma, office retail, comma, and or restaurant. So the primary use is restaurant. Office retail, sorry, the primary use is residential. The office, retail, and restaurant is secondary to that. And that goes in line with what the zoning code requirements are for uses in the RO zone. The proposed building was a mixed-use building. No changes in use as specified in the agreement shall be allowed without modification of this agreement. Default, upper right-hand corner there, is by the developer or subsequent owners when they fail to faithfully comply with all the terms and conditions included in the agreement. The developer, Mr. Southers, shall comply with the amended terms. Developer's failure to comply with the amended terms shall result in default. The agreement shall be terminated as a result of default, and the zoning of the property shall revert to R2 HD, historic overlay. The developer does agree that in the event the developer defaults on the terms and conditions of the agreement, the property shall revert back to R2 HD. Yes, the agreement does run with the land and binding upon the successors and the signees, including the city's corporate authorities, the developer, and all subsequent owners of the property. However, if you just do a quick Google search of what a default of a development agreement is, what you get is the bottom right-hand corner. A developer's default is where the developer is in material default of the performance of any of the material covenants, agreements, and stipulations contained in the development agreement. And the default is of a fundamental nature. That came from Law Insider. Based on that information, we feel the previous development agreement should be in default. A question is, if this development agreement is not in default, what would constitute a default of the developer in this case? This development agreement is 6 years old. The applicant wants to change the name of the developer. They want to change the type of project. That to me sounds like a brand new development agreement to me, not a modification of one. So let's go through the process. Developer wants to build something on a lot that the current zoning doesn't allow. They have to request a rezone, a lengthy and public hearing process. The city typically does not like to do rezones on properties because of cases like this. As such, they require a development agreement to go along with that rezone in order to ensure the developer builds the agreed to project. The development agreement is tied to the city for that specific developer for that specific project. Can the city modify the development agreement? Yeah, you guys have that language all over that development agreement. But let's look at it realistically. The city can modify the development agreement when the developer decides to build a new or different project, when the owner of the property that had the development agreement put in place chooses to do a new or different project. Yes. When the site and the project is sold as it has, changing the name of the developer to continue assurance that the project that necessitated the rezone gets built. Not both of these. When both the developer and project type change, that is a complete change of development agreement, and as such should be an altogether new agreement. Again, reiterating, David Southers failed to build the mixed-use project, and the tangible and material aspects of the development agreement were not followed through. By definition, this is a default of several very explicit material aspects of the development agreement. The property should revert back to R2, and the development agreement should be terminated. Just some quick snippets from the city's zoning code. This is all based on the old zoning code as this project was submitted in. I just want to say that I don't have an issue with the building. I like the design. I don't have an issue with the supposed proposed use, nor the actual conditional use. It's more along the lines of the process that's not being followed here and the zoning code requirements that are being misled or not used at all. So this property is RO. It used to be R2 before the rezone. So I've highlighted what uses are allowed in an RO and an R2. And yes, office is allowed in that. But this is a religious institution. We heard the applicant say over and over again that this is going to be used by the diocese for diocese activities. I don't know how else to define this as anything else other than a religious institution. Is it an office? Sure, it's other things too, but it's part of a religious institution, as is the next item, says uses related to and operated by a religious institution. As you can see, in both the R2 and the RO zone, those are conditional uses. The RO district, in the definition of the code, provides a buffer between high-intensity commercial areas and denser residential, like R2. R2 is actually medium-density residential. It's for facilitating mixed-use development and to provide for higher density residential and office uses. Further, the residential office zone can go with the conditional uses, but may only be approved in part as part of a mixed-use project or allowed uses such as an office or residential, and shall not exceed 30% of the gross floor area of the mixed-use project. Just underneath the use table, I did a quick little summary there. I took my measurements off of a scaled PDF, but rounding off, the assembly uses are about 9,500 square feet of the total 23,000 square feet. And that's about 40% of the building is assembly use. 60% is office use. Talking about the height of the building, this is always funny. I like this. The second somebody isn't putting on their drawings what the actual height of the building is, they're trying to obscure facts. When we're doing projects, and as you know, I'm an architect too. I go through this process all the time. A couple of the first things I do is a zoning code study, and I do a building code study. And those two are part of that project from the beginning, because that's what drives everything. This project from the get-go was exceeding the zoning code requirements. This is the previous project that had the highest ridge line was at 53, let's call it 54 feet. The midpoint of the 5 and 12 sloped roof, a much shallower sloped roof, is about 49, 40, or 50 feet. The R2 zone has a limitation of 35 feet, an RO zone 65 or 45 when adjacent to R1 or any existing single-family house. It doesn't say the property has to be zoned that. It just says any single-family house. The Diocese Chancery project is 62 feet to the highest ridge line, 10 feet higher than the Metro proposed project, 52 feet to the front parapet, well in excess of the 45 feet. And then I got different numbers from the architect because I took the lowest point of the lowest roof and the highest point of the highest roof. I actually came up with a midpoint that's lower than what you guys had. So the pictures below is the office building / single family house directly to the north. A couple other things I want to note here is how the applicant keeps referring to Capitol Plaza as an example of why this building should be allowed to go so high. Capitol Plaza would not be built, would not be allowed under today's zoning code, so it shouldn't even be considered. They keep referring to the federal building down the road. It's not in an R2 or RO zone. It's not in the north end. It's not in the historic overlay zone. It shouldn't even be considered. Occupant loads. As I noted, we go with building code and zoning code studies at the beginning. So here's some information from the International Building Code on floor allowances per occupant. So when you're dealing with assembly, it's either standing space, unconcentrated tables and chairs, concentrated tables and chairs, or built-in chairs. And those all have different area counts, 5 square feet, 7 square feet, 15 square feet. For the most part, I'm applying a 15 square foot, giving them the most credit there. Business areas are at 150 square feet per occupant. And then seated areas are per the number of seats that are available. Educational is 20 net. They have a classroom on here. So I just drew a line around the building. I don't think I included overhangs or balconies or any of that stuff. So I came up with a grand total of 9,000 square feet on the ground floor. There's different ways to look at this when you apply all the areas based on the assembly use per the building code. I get 395. If you base it just on the number of seats, I get 245. If you just base it off of just office use, that would be 64. But you can see this floor has 4 offices. The rest is assembly space. The second floor, 7,000 square feet of office space. It's 47 occupants at 150, possibly 31 if you just count the number of offices. The third floor is again 7,000 square feet, but it has a 400 square feet chapel. So it has fixed seats. We include those in there. If we look at it just office, it's 47 occupants, or it's 25 counting the seats plus 36 for the chapel. The building and zoning code occupancy count. This is just for the building code. I'm looking at it from a couple different points of view. Just an office building per the applicant, 35 office users. The IBC, if we treat it as just office, it's 155 occupants. Counting the seats and the desks and the chapel seats, we get 337 occupants. Or if I max out the IBC, I get 523 occupants for the building. Nowhere near the 35 or the 50 or the 100 that is being presented to you. The parking options are, the easy code is, still treating the building as a 23,700 square foot building. I get 79 stalls. That's actually what's in the application. Hello? Lost?
It's elsewhere. It's just that computer, that one is there. It's just that. It's on your screen.
All right, thank you.
The screen went out. I'm sorry.
All right. But if we applied the actual uses and compounded the counts, which I know the zoning code doesn't want to do, but what I think this building should be, because as an office building, and I do office buildings as my practice, when there's a different tenant and you do a tenant improvement package and you're going for permit on that, each one of those tenants is treated separately. So as an entire office building with two different uses in there, they should be treated separately. So if we look at that way, the ground floor should have 74 stalls associated with it, second floor 24, the third floor 27, for a total of 125 stalls minimum. And that's based off land uses that are in the City of Boise zoning code. These are a couple of pictures. I too just walked by the site late one afternoon. I had a couple of issues with the presentation there. Can I have another minute? I have one slide to go.
Just try to wrap it up, Mr.
All right.
Hagan. Thanks.
These are all pictures of the area around St. John's Cathedral and St. Joe's School and the parking lots and the streets, and they're all being used. This was on a Friday afternoon. I do go by it occasionally after hours, but the lots are all being used. So and the one across from St. John's, which I understand is for St. Joe's School, I understand they use that for child recesses. So the ability to use the surrounding lots and the surrounding parking on the streets shouldn't be considered, at least not to the extent that they're applying it. So summary of findings, the CIR should be denied. Why? The development agreement should have ceased and been terminated when the original developer failed to build the project. A new owner should not be allowed to change both the owner and the use of a development agreement. A wholly new development agreement and process should be followed. The property should revert back to R2HD. The CUP should be denied. First and foremost, the CUP should include an actual request for a conditional use. The CUP they've submitted doesn't list anything about a conditional use, but it's called a conditional use permit. And that conditional use should be the proposed conditional use of religious institution, not office. The height should be limited to 45 feet as per the zoning code, and much more parking than 35 stalls on site should be provided. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hagan. Appreciate that. Okay, next up, we have people who have signed up to testify on this issue. I have just two
Mr. Chair.
people.
Questions from the commission first.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Then we open it up for questions from the commission.
Do I call you Mr. Chair, I think? Standing chair? Commissioner?
Commissioner Moore.
So I have a couple of questions, and I guess I'll start with the CAR and then move to the CUP. So for the CAR, if I'm looking at the existing rezone or the existing development agreement, no, item number 7 default. In A, it says, in the event the Boise City Council determines this agreement shall be modified, the terms of this agreement shall be amended and developer shall comply with the amended terms. Is that kind of generally the process that we're seeing here? Is it's been determined that you can modify based on the proposal, and so that's what we're doing here? Is that the general process?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, that is correct. This is, I believe, kind of standard language we have in most of our DAs. So it lists out if you want to, if you want to change it, then here are the remedies to do it. The first one is listed out as a modification. It goes back before the city council, then they would have to make a decision on the modification to choose. Even to default on this still requires an action by city council and to revert back.
Understood. So, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So that seems like we're kind of pursuing this process, and then the next stop would be city council, and they could determine if it has been defaulted and should be denied at that point, unless, we make a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that is correct.
And then, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So I'll move to the CUP. So for the CUP, I know that a lot of the testimony has revolved around kind of the definitions of office use versus use related to and operated by a religious institution and the religious institution definition. And so if I go into the legacy zoning code under definitions, I see that, what is it? It's Title 11, Chapter 12. So for uses related to and operating by the religious institution, it kind of lists thrift store, homeless shelter, rectory, or similar that is operated and located on the same parcel. So does that kind of negate this as falling into that specific category?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that was my interpretation of that.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So for the religious institution, then it says a building that is used primarily for religious worship and related religious activities, because they're not really, I think, as I understand it, the intent isn't to hold kind of mass or any sort of worship activities in this building. It wouldn't fall under religious institution as well.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is also correct. It's an office building that happens to be owned by the diocese.
Gotcha. Perfect. And I'll leave it there and let somebody else take some questions.
Commissioner Seha, Mooney.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for staff regarding parking. The staff report indicates, and both the applicant and the NA have talked about 77 or 79 required parking spaces. The staff report says 77 and 50 provided on site. So just so I understand it correctly, 35 office workers in the chancery is what's in the building during normal office hours, but the code requires 77 for normal office hours. Is that how we interpret the code? That's for staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct. The 77, I believe, was based on the 23,000 square footage that was listed in the application. But it's 1 per 300 square feet, and that's what the code requires.
Okay, so follow on, Mr. Chair, regarding, so the applicant needs 27 off-site parking spots just for normal business hours, and they're going to accomplish that with a parking agreement attached to the development agreement. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the parking agreement allows for additional off-site parking, but it would be limited because it's already shared between 2 other uses. So it would only be used for the off business hours events that the diocese is hosting within their office.
Okay,
so they would still need a parking
Sure.
reduction because it doesn't meet the 70 or the 67, depending on which square footage you use.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm confused. So the code is clear that we need 77 parking spots. They're providing 50 on site and 27 off-site with an agreement. So we're basically, the application is to get relief on 27 because those 50 that are off-site are rarely going to be available because of the other uses. Is that true for staff?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct. That's why they're requesting a parking reduction to basically facilitate the deficiency in their on-site parking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
David, just a couple things real quick, or maybe just one for you on, let me see what page am I? Well, anyways, you wrote this, so you can comment. This says about the development agreement modification, and you wrote, these modifications are minor and include changes to section 3 permitted uses. I know Mr. Hagan spent a lot of his time on testifying that this is a major issue, but in staff's judgment, these are just minor modifications to this agreement, as you wrote.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that was my interpretation of it. The land use does list out sort of specific uses that could be accommodated on the site. The use they're proposing is on that list. And I think the wording change is just kind of correcting some wording issues about the 3-story to 4-story and the residential.
Okay, thank you, David. And Ms. Nelson, on your team, perhaps the representative from the church may be able to answer unless. Yeah, go ahead. Do I need name and address again?
Christian Welp.
Yeah, the question, how many mass services are on Sunday at the cathedral?
We would have
Like a 9
5
and
or
a 10,
6
15?
masses Saturday night and Sunday.
Okay.
Probably 5, one Saturday evening, and I believe there's 4 on Sunday.
Do you know the total number of people per, or the total number accommodated on a Sunday?
It's a great question, Commissioner. I would say
I mean, you can bend it up.
5 masses. I mean, if there's 500 people at each mass, which would be very high, could be 2,500. Is that right? Yes.
Okay, great. So so we can say like the 2,000 people a Sunday, or
It would be less than
comes-
2,000 every Sunday.
okay, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
1,500.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's all I need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Mooney.
got another question that didn't come up in the staff or the applicant's discussion regarding a streetscape. The 8th Street Bikeway has obviously been a hot topic in this area. Can staff answer the question about their view of how the 8th Street project, which is design year 26, 27, is that going to be accommodated? This application won't squelch any future 8th Street Bikeway issues. Is that true?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is true. I did look at what they're proposing along the detached sidewalks with the street trees, and it is consistent with the street design for the 8th Street Bikeway.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions about the height. So the height is really limited to 45 feet, or would be limited to 45 feet in this parcel because of that single-family residence directly to the north that the diocese owns. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there is a single-family house adjacent to, across the alley and to the north. There's an office building also adjacent to it that fronts onto 8th Street, and there's the parking lot, and then there's another house along the alley. And that's the one that's adjacent to them that's bringing their height down to 45.
Okay, but Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
there's nothing kind of, that's the only structure kind of in the perimeter that's really keeping that height restricted to 45 feet. If that house was not there, what would the height limit be at that point?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think it'd be like 60 or 65 feet.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
so you said that, and I don't know if this is a question that you can answer off the top of your head, but the historic preservation has different criteria for the height, for approving, height criteria. Do you know just a brief summary of what their criteria is for approving height?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I do not know what the standards are. However, I do have the senior historic plan who could answer that.
That'd be awesome.
Generally, when we're looking at the height of a building in relationship to other buildings in the historic district, it's all part of the context, and you keep the scale consistent with the scale of other buildings. That's why in my staff analysis, I looked at buildings in the area to try to find, what is a reasonable height. So, of course, the numbers have to be met to the degree they do. But when we look at it, it's like a good context will be, don't build a 4-story condo beside a 1-story house. Just try to have the pattern and the flow of the structure, and the heights relates to nearby properties. That's what we typically look at.
Okay. And then, Mr. Chair,
Commissioner
one
Moore.
last one. So I know some of the concern is that this would be used as an event center. And what if, if that sort of happened, what remedies would kind of the neighborhood have if, it was becoming apparent this was getting used as an event center? Would there be like code enforcement or something like that, sort of complaints that they could file?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think that would be one of the remedies. If they do notice that the diocese is renting this out to other third parties to be used as an event center, then they could make code enforcement complaint, and then we could request that they come back and do a conditional use at that point.
Okay. So, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
Yeah, sorry, following Commissioner Moore's discussion a bit regarding, I guess not necessarily, but back to parking. And Mr. Hagan and this neighborhood's position on the compounded parking requirements as it relates to an event center versus office space. My question for staff is 50 is what's being provided on site. 77 is what's required, which we've talked about. That's a significant parking reduction, greater than 50%, as I see it. How often do we do that large of a parking reduction in the city?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we do process them from time to time, but we have to look at sort of site-specific conditions in the neighborhood when we look at those and whether we're going to support them. Like, is there public transit available? Is there bikeways in the area? Is there alternative? The location of it with respect to the neighborhood or respect to downtown, which might have open up other options for alternative transportation. So depending on the location, these things may or may not be supported if they have no public transit, if they don't have any bike facilities, things of that nature. Or in this case, there is, by my assessment, there is two bus routes that go right by the site. State Street's not that, the State Street bus route's not that far away. There are several main bikeways in this area, including right in front of it. They're providing additional bike parking on site. Those are kind of the reasons we look at to help justify and review whether or not this is the right choice or to support such a request. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I have a question
Absolutely.
along the lines of the parking piece and public transit. So there is public transit as noted in the map and the analysis, but is there consideration taken into account on the fact that there is no public transit services on Sundays, and there's limited transit services on Saturdays?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct. Our bus routes and our services are limited on the off weekdays. In that case, there's the office itself would only maintain business hours on Monday through Friday. So if it is operating during the weekends, it would probably be for one of their offsite events, at which case they would have the additional overflow parking available to them on the second lot. So we take those in consideration. Yes, we understand that our public transit is limited, but there's also bike routes in the area and other means of transportation, both for walking and biking, to help support this.
David, real quick, under this reversion scenario, so what would happen if the DA were scrapped and the developer was considered in default? Then the original zoning of R2 would go back into effect. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think we would have to look at it to see what this would have been reverted to as part of the modern zoning code. if it would still go back to the R2 or go back to maybe an MX1, which is similar to what the C1 in the area is. I don't know the answer because I'd have to figure out the methodology that our modern zoning code used when it was considering that conversion. But it
Okay.
would go back to whatever that dictated.
You anticipated where I was headed with that was that I thought the city had designated that in the land use map as MX1. So we could very well, it could very well revert and then we'd end up seeing something very similar regardless.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is possible.
Okay, last call, commissioners. Everybody feeling good? Okay. Thanks, team. Okay, so now it looks like we move on. We have some number of people signed up and then we probably have some people online here. I see some hands raised. I'll rely on the planning staff to deal with them. Meanwhile, I have Bill Doyle and Leah McMillan, I think. We have you. Okay, come on up. We have 3 minutes per person. And anybody else here to testify on this, just be ready to queue up as soon as these two are done. And just, we need everybody's name and address for the record.
Bill Doyle, 3026 South Brookridge in Boise. And I won't take the full 3 minutes. I just wanted to speak in support of both applications and particularly with the 65 height limitation. I'm a longtime member of St. John's Parish. I'm an architecturally sensitive person. It's an exceptional project, and I just wanted to voice my support for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Ms. McMillan?
Good evening. I'm Leah McMillan. My address is 3050 West Hester here in Boise. I'm an architect and I'm also a parishioner, and I'm in support of the Diocese building. I feel the design is congruent with the neighborhood. It uses local materials, it's pedestrian walkways, bikeability, and the several windows are very pleasant to look at and contribute positively to the neighborhood. The height is reasonable for an office building to accommodate both structure and the gable roof, as well as the penthouses for the elevator and the mechanical equipment. As noted earlier, there are several buildings in the neighborhood that match the profile. And the design fits on a prominent corner and is beautiful. I frequent the area for both work and personal life, and although parking can be a struggle in the area, I feel it's a normal part of life in the North End. The uses of this office building do not require all the parking to be on site, and they have provided several areas for shared parking when needed after hours. I am just here to voice my support again for the design, the development modification, and the conditional use. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McMillan. Okay, come on up.
Hi, I'm April Frederick. I live at 1416 North 8th Street. To me, this location's the gateway to the North End. And I really don't see, I mean, I look at this as a residential neighborhood, and I don't see all the tall buildings. I see homes. And so I just find it just really out of scale for the neighborhood. But anyhow, at 47 feet tall, not 45, and at 23,000 square feet, this is almost 700 square feet per office. That's amazing. I suggest that the diocese remove a floor in order to make the height rather than ask for an exception. Also to use that courtyard area in back that's at a lower, that isn't being used at all, or making the buildings behind the street view taller. It's also hard to imagine the parking will be adequate considering the church has already balked at using these same lots for school pickup and drop off to make room for the planned protected bikeway. The church already heavily uses on-street parking in this area, and as a nonprofit, they are not subsidizing that parking And as a result, there will be even more of a burden on property owners without benefit to the neighborhood. Please don't approve these exceptions. This is I think it's a big mistake. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frederick. Crystal, we have some folks online, do we? And are you able to beam one of them up to us?
Bruce, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is.
Hold on one second, sir. We've got somebody online here really quick. And then if you're waiting to speak and you're in the hearing room here, just go ahead and queue up to the front so we can get you quickly here. Back to our online.
Okay. My name is Bruce Mostorovich. I live at 450 West Grove Street, so in the downtown area. I think the height's fine. I don't think the city should really ever be mandating parking, so I don't care about that part of it. I do take issue with converting some of our much needed residential space into what should have been a mixed use area and then not actually having any mixed use in that, just having pure office space. It'd be nice to see like some actual housing go up there. If we think that it's going to convert during the new zoning code, it'd be nice to see that it actually does, rather than just kind of assuming that this is going to go to the next one. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mostorovich. All right, my gentleman here in the hearing room coming up. Do we have anybody else? Here? Okay, great, thanks.
My name is Scott Pearhill. I live on 820 North Harrison Avenue. I'm about 9 blocks from where the proposed building would be. I'm in favor of this use. I think the building will be beautiful. I noticed that the Cathedral and St. Joseph's School have been in the area on the border, the gateway as it was described to the north end, for more than 100 years. So they are not new to the neighborhood. They are part of the neighborhood and always have been in service to the neighborhood for quite some time. It seems fitting to me that the office building for the Diocese of Boise should be somewhere near this. And I think it will, I think you'll end up with good neighbors in a venerable building that matches the existing architecture. And so I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. All right, Crystal.
Mr. Chair, we have Ian Hoffman up next.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman, you are up.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ian Hoffman. I live at 1820 North 7th Street in Boise, so I'm about 5 blocks away from the proposed site. I just wanted to thank you all for all the wonderful dialogue and comments that have been provided this evening, and just express my approval for this project. I know a lot of comments have been made, and valid as they are. From a purely user of the space and a person that goes by there several times a day, as well as uses the grocery store. My son's preschool is right across the street from this area. I'm really excited to see something be built in this pit. And while I know we all can comment on the particular use, I do appreciate the use that has been provided, and I do think that the building, the architecture from an infill standpoint is the best I think we can hope for in a spot like this. The street is busy, so housing might not be the best use of this spot. Having a coffee shop or something, I know we all might want more of that, but I really do think that the use of this is going to be a very appropriate thing to the area. And as far as the parking goes, I am all in favor of proposing ways and other alternatives for people to find different ways. I know that transit is not a huge aspect, or has been dwindling, and so any way we can promote that in the future is going to be beneficial in my mind. So I do respect everybody's comments from the north end, but I am very much in favor of this and excited, hopefully, to see it pass. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
Next up, we have Sandra Herman.
Okay, Sandra Herman. Ms. Herman, have we got you?
Can you hear me now?
We can. Thanks. You're up. 3 minutes.
1404 North 7th Street. I would like to suggest that the commission look carefully at the interior of the Chancery Building. They're suggesting that only 50 priests will be using this intermittently, but you've got 105 seats in a lecture hall. You've got 86 seats in a banquet hall, and that's just part of the first floor. I see this being used quite differently, and I think either you're building this for 50 people or there's a different aspect that we're not being told about. I also noticed that there are 9 storage spaces in this building. 6 of those are very large spaces with windows that are adjacent to office spaces. And I'm curious as to whether those will be used as offices later. It's very possible that it could be. And I'm thinking about this building and its permanence. If the Chancery ever leaves this building could be used very differently than what their intent is. I'm already seeing heavy use of on-street parking in this neighborhood, both by the church and school, the dense housing and commercial that are there, and Boise High right there. I just can't believe that they'll be able to arrange their events around quinceañeras and weddings and funerals and all of the other things that are already happening in the neighborhood. I'm also concerned about saying that they can use buses and bikes when these 50 priests will be coming from out of town, and the likelihood of them using that kind of transportation is minimal. And I just like to once again say, this is a permanent building. We need to consider it as, what is this 30 years from now and 50 years from now? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Herman. Crystal, we have more? Last call. Okay. Okay. My
Mr. Chair,
understanding.
we got some hands up all of a sudden. Alexa Reutman. Oh, wait, nope, hand went down. Okay, James McGuire. James McGuire, here we go.
James McGuire.
Okay. My name is James McGuire. I live at 818 East Highland View Drive in Boise. I'm a retired architect. I have 20 years of experience planning, designing, and constructing buildings on college campuses, both in California, Idaho, and in Texas. I would just like to voice my strong support for the design of this building and for your approval of the CAR, the height exception, and the parking reduction. I think the building will be a tremendous addition to the North End and to the city as a whole. And in addition, I just take, having seen the presentations here tonight, the sensitivity with which the massing of the building has been handled, respecting the residential uses which are further to the north, while appropriately responding to the more urban fabric of the city on the intersection of 8th and 8th and 4th Street. So in closing, I just want to say, it's not often that a building of this kind of permanence and stature comes before you, and it is a great opportunity for our city to upgrade the kind of architecture that is around us and it affects us. And I would like to reiterate that I fully support the building and your action to approve the conditional use permit for the height exception and the parking reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Crystal, we have one more possibly?
We have 2 more.
Two more,
Alexa
okay.
Reutman, you're up next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Alexa, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm just lowering my hand. Good evening, Chairman and the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Alexa Reutman, and I live at 924 North 8th Street, Boise, Idaho. For transparency, I do sit on the North End Neighborhood Association Board. However, I'm providing comment as a direct neighbor of the project and someone who has lived on this block for close to 2 years. I'm mainly opposed to the CAR for this project, specifically because it significantly differs from the original development agreement associated with the rezone. I'm kind of at a loss for trying to understand the view of office use to housing people and how that's not extremely different. In an area with limited infill opportunities like the North End, the Chancery Building project represents a departure from that original rezone. I'm troubled by the use of the development agreement to facilitate an increase of unnecessary office space and kind of questioning the alignment of the community's long-term interests, as I've heard multiple times, especially during the new zoning code hearings, how housing is very important to our community. So I think it's really important as we aim for responsible development that it's crucial we ensure these projects adhere to the agreements that initiated their approval. And I had some other things to say, but I do have some serious questions to ask as a resident, as things have come up both from the applicant and in testimony that may not be addressed right now, but more as like just food for thought. One of the things is I'm just kind of curious how this is not a religious building if there is a chapel inside the building. On another note, there was a building pointed out just south as a juxtaposition of the height of the building just south of the church. And in that building, there's empty office space. So just a block away from the church, there's plenty of office space available that's been sitting there for over a year. Also, it was mentioned by I believe the parishioner that they have a growing congregation with new families who are just starting their families. And I really have to ask that, how is this building moving into the future with no housing present? And similar to Sandra's comments on public transportation, I'm curious how many of those office users are able and willing to take public transportation or ride their bikes? And does the church provide City Go membership? Does the diocese incentivize active transportation use among their employees and members? Because I walk this area often, and I have to say that it seems very car-centric. I also want to just say that this is a heavily used corner, not just by pedestrians, but cars alike. There have been multiple times where I feel like I risk my life standing on that corner, walking to the bus. And thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Okay, Ms. Reutman, thank you so much.
Last hand, oh, never mind. More, keep going up. Claire Linter, sorry, Claire.
Okay, Claire, you are up. Do we have Claire?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Claire. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. Oh, I just wanted to comment to respond to Alexa. I actually attend St. John's Cathedral, and I live 3 miles away at 727 East Highland View Drive, and I actually walk to church. So yes, parishioners do get there on foot. And also to address one of her questions, a chancery office is an administrative type of use. So even religious institutions like a church need administration. So that's why they need a building like this. Just personally, from having, passed by that area again and again, I like I said, I go to church there and I pass by there for almost daily for my stuff that I do. I'm really impressed with the sensitivity that they've considered with the area and the height of different buildings and how they've used natural materials. And I think it would be actually an upgrade for that area. Right now it's an empty lot, which, you know, doesn't look so great. And I think it would be a nice addition to that part of town. So I support this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, Katie Fight has raised her hand and lowered it a couple times, so maybe we'll just give her a try.
Excellent. Katie, have we got you online there?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. I'd like to say I do not support allowing all these exceptions to the zoning code, no matter which version of the zoning code you look at. This is basically what people view as a gateway to a significant gateway to the north end. And this building will loom over the area. And I actually view it as being an eyesore that will sort of wall in that part of the neighborhood. And to grant an exception to having the one-story house next door, that just sort of negates the whole purpose of a zoning code. And to not actually go through the full process, even though this strongly deviates from the use that was allowed in the past. And like a couple of the previous folks, I truly don't understand how you cannot call this a religious institution, because it's church offices, there's a chapel, there's going to be church functions there, and there's this huge cross sort of looming right, you know, where the huge glass front is. So, I mean, if that doesn't put the stamp of this being a religious facility on the building, I don't know what does. I want to mention one item, and that's that the tree spaces on 4th Street are 8 feet. I believe it's 8 feet, the widest the city has. I'm not sure what they are in the Conrad Lombard artist renderings, but they sure look smaller to me. And I'm concerned that this will have some more little stunted trees in front of it, which is not what an entrance to the north end should have. I mean, a primary entrance should have, if you want to like tone down the thrust of the building jutting out in the street. And I can tell you from driving by and walking by this sometimes almost every day of the week, there is, I mean, this is going to be a much worse traffic nightmare than it already is with the development of St. Luke's. There's the traffic back and forth to the various schools, parents with their kids. There's the Catholic Church traffic. And I see the Catholic Church traffic all the time. And there's families with kids. You know, the families with the kids aren't going to get in the bus, or they're not going to walk 3 miles. I mean, this is really, my view is that from looking at what goes on in this neighborhood, going to be a very car-centric building. And so there's really just, you know, traffic problems that I don't think will be addressed in any way, and granting traffic exceptions will just make this worse. So anyway, that's what I have to say. I would say this needs to go back to the drawing board. It needs to comply with the height, etc.
Thank you, Ms. Fight.
Mr. Chair, we didn't get Ms. Fight's address.
Oh, 1006 North 5th, Boise, 83702.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fight. And thank you, Ms. Rain. And we have one more. It looked like I saw Louis Linterer.
Yes, my name is Lou Linterer. I live at 727 East Highland View Drive. And I just want to express my pleasure and I'm strongly in favor of this project. The Catholic Church has been a solid presence in this area for a century. This building, I believe, will be in long-term use by the church. I don't think the church is going anywhere. So I think it will, if there's any concern that, it could flip and turn into some other use, I really do not think that there should be any concern about that. And I think the architecture is beautiful. I think when you compare it to the architecture of some of the other buildings in the area, I think this would be a tremendous upgrade to the area. And like I said, will be, I think the design is timeless. I think that this is the type of building that would be there for the next 100 years. So I am strongly in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Linter. We got everybody, Crystal? Okay, and we've got cleared, nobody left here, right? Okay, we're good to go. So my notes indicate then that it is now before we have, sorry, it's not back to us. We have 5 minutes for your rebuttal, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Maybe I'll start with some of the comments that we heard, miscellaneous comments there at the end. Traffic isn't directly related to the height exception or the parking reduction, but just for a general picture about the use and the concerns we've heard from the neighborhood, the traffic trips that are generated by this use are actually significantly less than historically were on the site with the commercial use, and are less than the metro use that was approved here previously. So at least that will be an improvement. Also, there was comment about the landscaping. It's also in the diocese's interest to ensure that the streetscape is improved nicely. They will be meeting the city code requirements there, and the caliper of inches of trees there that is 2.5 inches per code. The development agreement modification, just to address that briefly, we agree with the comments from the city and the city's view on that. Certainly agree with the interpretation that the site has already been zoned. The development agreement does remain valid until it is removed from the property, and we're just acting within the current zoning, pursuing the modification consistent with city code as is allowed. And maybe it's also helpful to understand that development agreements don't require a party to construct a building. They limit what can be constructed. And so because we are proposing something slightly different, we are coming back for a modification as is contemplated by that agreement. We are also seeking this height exception consistent with code. We recognize that in the code that 65 feet is allowed in the zone, 45 feet is required when you have the adjacent home that is actively used for a residence. Based on that one single home, there is only one that creates that trigger, as has been noted. That is forcing us down into this 45-foot limit. The property to our north, Mr. Hagan noted described as a single-family residence. It is an office, and it's actually zoned commercial, so it doesn't trigger the same requirement for height. But the height that we're requesting is consistent with what was approved before. It's also consistent with what's in the area and appropriate based on the standards in your code, and really consistent with what's going on in this commercial corner on an area that has mixed uses, that already has height and is along a busy street. It does create a nice fronting and pedestrian entrance with that entrance on the corner. And so it is providing a nice gateway into the neighborhood. To turn to parking, Commissioner Mooney, I just have a correction for your comments and questions to staff, just so that we're clear in talking about the same reduction that we're requesting, that based on the correction and the square footage of the building, that it is 20,000, not 23,000, when using the city code's definition for how you calculate the gross floor area, which is used for parking calculations. We only need 67 spaces here, not 77. And so it is a difference of 17 spaces. And for those 17 spaces, we've tried to walk through, and I think there's been further discussion after our presentation about the support for that comes from the fact that we do only have the 35 employees, that 50 spaces on site will more than accommodate their use, even if every single one of them drives, which we do not expect, plus 15 visitors per day. And that's more than is anticipated to come to the office. And so the use is appropriate. We also do have transit. We also are bringing employment into a residential neighborhood consistent with your comp plan, because that encourages biking and walking, which we expect from our employees, many of which do live in the immediate neighborhood. We've got also the overflow into the offsite parking if it's needed. We showed you pictures to show that it does have capacity. Certainly any events that are scheduled, which are few and far between, at the diocese offices will be scheduled outside of school and church events and school and church use. But there is overflow during the day if it's needed for office uses. Again, we don't expect that it is. When you look at the events that are scheduled for outside of working hours, the use of the building that they will involve and the numbers of people that we can anticipate based on the diocese's current and actual events that would continue in this new relocated office building, we have more than enough space on site. And so it's unlikely even they will need to use an off-site parking lot. But for all of these reasons, we ask for your support of both applications.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I think we are, okay, finally, after jumping the gun like twice here, when that closes our public portion of the hearing and bring it back to the commission. And I'll just remind everybody that we have two pieces to this puzzle here. We have the modification to the development agreement, which is CAR 23-20, and then we also have a CUP 23-57 before us. So welcome any motion or discussion on both or either of these issues.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
I'll just do both because so I move that we recommend approval of CAR 23-20 and approve CUP 23-57 with all the terms in the staff report as stated in the staff report.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Commissioners, do we have a second for that?
I'll second that.
Okay, second from Commissioner Seha. Do you want to go ahead and get us started here, Commissioner Moore?
Absolutely. So there's kind of the two applications, and I think that they're really tied together, which is why I made the motion together. So I'll tackle the development agreement, which is part of the CAR. So the development agreement, in the development agreement, it allows amendment to the document of the judgment of City Council. We're the recommending body to that. So the procedure for the development agreement seems proper and based on kind of our discussion with staff tonight, it's kind of following along the proper channels and the methods. And it's up to City Council to make that final judgment. As far as the modifications to the development agreement, it does state residential office/retail and or restaurant uses. And so that's not it's not an and statement. It's not residential and, it's residential office and or. And so in my mind, and the way I'm interpreting that statement is it could be any one of those, but not necessarily a combination of those, but it could be a combination. So moving on to the definition of uses. Our city code in the legacy code in Title 11, Chapter 12 of that title, so it's way down at the bottom, is pretty specific at what it's defining some of these uses as. And so, a religious institution that is used primarily for religious worship and related religious activities. If there's a chapel, which I don't see on the plans that we have in our packet, but if some of those are used for maybe a small chapel or some sort of activity, I think the way that my understanding, the way that city staff might interpret that is it's not, their primary use is not the religious use. That would be, an accessory to the allowed use. And the allowed use, as they're interpreting it, is office. So onto the definition of uses related to and operating by a religious institution. That is a relatively narrow definition as well. And that one is an and statement or adjacent parcel to the religious institution. And so that is a pretty narrow definition, and in city staff's interpretation, this use does not fall in that category. So that kind of just leaves us with office as the allowed use in the zone, and that is allowed by the development agreement. So onto the height exemption. In our packet, there's kind of part of the approval criteria kind of outlines the distance from this particular building with the height exemption to the neighborhood, and to that kind of driving factor on keeping that height exemption to 45 feet as opposed to 65 feet. It's separated by the courtyard and parking and the alley and several other things that are kind of buffering that height from that adjacent residential neighborhood. So in my mind, I think it's appropriate, especially with that buffer zone. And then finally, with the parking agreement, my understanding is that it will be tied to the DA. So it's not kind of necessarily it is a parking reduction, but instead of getting, 67 parking spaces all the time, you have 50 parking spaces and then 100 parking spaces for large events. And if something, I think part of the parking agreement that I read talked about making sure that 17 spaces, if that lot was ever sold, 17 spaces would stay. So you're guaranteed 67 spaces at all times, but for all intents and purposes, you actually gain more spaces than would technically be required unless that property is sold. So for all of those reasons, I'm in support of the two items and move that we approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Seha?
I don't have anything to add to that.
John, have you got anything for us?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner
Mr.
Mooney.
Chair. Yeah, Commissioner Moore, the great summary and analysis of the issues. I don't have anything to add to the CAR discussion and the development agreement discussion. I agree with everything Commissioner Moore discussed, and how the DA is going to flow and eventually into council anyway. I do have some problems with the CUP. So I guess I have to, if we're voting them in total, then I have to vote against it, primarily for the parking reduction. Based on the record, it's 77 spaces, and that's in our agenda packet, and that's in the public record, and that's 27 short. And despite Ms. Nelson's discussion about it, we have to go with that and then apply the code to that. So in my view, the parking reduction triggers the CUP that we talked about earlier today in the legal session, which is will not adversely impact other property of the vicinity. And I believe it will, because it's an office use, as Commissioner Moore just discussed, requiring 77 parking spaces on site and 50 being offered. Now I agree with many of the public comments about parking reductions, and I'm probably one of the less car-centric people in town. I've got my bike on most of the time. So I have a hard time opposing this based on parking, but the code's pretty clear about it. And when I asked the question about how often do we do this significant of a parking reduction, I didn't get a good warm fuzzy about that. And I really, looking at the code, say the site is not large enough to accommodate the proposed use. And the proposed use is, if it complies with all the conditions imposed, even with the off-site parking agreement, I think it will still adversely affect other property in the vicinity. So I'm a no on the CUP, but a yes on the CAR.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Mooney. For my part, I will be supporting the motion. I believe that my excellent colleague, Commissioner Moore, really has a great grasp of all of these things, and I appreciate her commitment to follow through up on each one of these issues. I'm just not persuaded that the remedy to kick this back to its original zoning is really any kind of a remedy. So I'm not really seeing where that gets us anywhere. But that's something council can certainly consider. And my question to the church as for attendance, I mean, if we've got 2,000 people coming to that corner, I myself am not too worried about an office space with 35 people. I'm sure in the Catholic Church's wildest dreams that they hope that they would break this development agreement and their conditional use and have lots and lots of people in that building. But you know, they have a better handle on what's going to happen in that building than all of us do. So I'll be in support of the motion. And again, I appreciate the work of the commissioners on this.
Mr. Chair, the two items were taken up in a single motion. It sounds like based on deliberations, there may be a commissioner that is yes on one and no on the other. So I would ask the chair to consider potentially withdrawing the motion and taking up the items up separately.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore?
do I need to withdraw my motion? Okay, do I have unanimous consent to withdraw my motion?
Okay, the maker of the motion has asked for unanimous consent to withdraw the motion. Do we have consent from the commission? With no objection noted. So the motion is withdrawn, and now we are back with it before the commission again. We have two pieces of it. We've got the modification to the development agreement, which is CAR 23-20, and we have the conditional use permit, which is 23-57, and we'll entertain motions on those items apparently separately.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So I move that we recommend approval of CAR 23-20 for the reasons stated in the staff report and already previously stated.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve CAR 23-20 and a second from Commissioner Mooney. Do we have any discussion? Okay, as we've plowed that ground already, it appears we can go ahead and call the question.
Blanchard.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Mooney.
Aye.
Seha.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Okay, so that leaves us with the CUP 23-57. That's the commercial conditional use permit for the parking reduction and height exception on this property. Do we have a motion from the commission?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
I move that we approve CUP 23-57 for the reasons stated in the staff report and previously stated.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to approve CUP 23-57 from Commissioner Moore. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second from Commissioner Seha. Any discussion? Okay, again, everybody have their cards on the table, so we'll go ahead and have Christina call the roll.
Blanchard.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Mooney.
Nay.
Seha.
Aye.
3 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. We got through that first issue, and I think we'll, in all my powers as one-time chair, I'm going to take a 5-minute break and let Mr. Chair get back in his seat. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
All right, let's move along here to our next item. Thank you again, Commissioner Blanchard, for running the show on that last item. Up next is item number 2, correct? Yes. CVA 23-26 Northridge Architecture at 1220 West State Street. This is a variance to encroach the rear setback on 0.14 acres in a PCDD zone. First, we're going to hear from staff, Mr. David Mosher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The applicant is requesting a variance to encroach into the rear setback to install a walk-in freezer and screen wall on the west side of the building and a trash enclosure on the east side of the building for the property located at 1220 West State Street. And as you can see on the slide before you, the subject property is located on the northeast corner of the intersection of State and 13th. There is a variety of commercial and residential uses in this area along State Street corridor, which is an arterial roadway. The property is also located within the downtown Boise Regional Activity Center. The existing structure was constructed in 1937 as a commercial garage, which operated for approximately 74 years. In 2011, it was converted to a retail use, which closed about a year or so ago. The applicant is now requesting to convert the existing building into a restaurant. And as such, they're requesting to install a standalone walk-in freezer on the west side of the building adjacent to 13th Street within the 15-foot rear yard setback. The walk-in freezer will be screened from the adjacent properties by 11-foot, 2-inch high CMU wall. In addition, the applicant is requesting to install a small trash enclosure on the east side of the property, which will contain space for 5 95-gallon trash cans. The trash cans will be screened from State Street by a 6-foot high CMU wall. The trash enclosure is also located within the 10-foot rear yard parking setback. I would note that there is a hardship and exceptional circumstance with the property that justifies the granting of the variance. The subject property is a small commercial corner parcel which contains a building that was constructed in 1937 prior to the adoption of the zoning code. The proposed building addition and trash enclosure will match the existing building setback along the rear property line. The size of the small corner parcel and the location of the existing building limits where any additional building or any addition could be located without interfering with the vehicle circulation. In addition, there is space inside the building to locate the freezer. This was noted in the project report. However, the planning team believes that there is an exceptional circumstance to justify not locating the freezer inside the building. Doing so could potentially reduce the usable floor area of the building and thereby impact the future commercial adaptive reuse of the structure. This slide shows the building and the proposed screen walls as seen from State Street, just to give you an idea of what the elevations look like. The planning team did receive a letter from a neighbor expressing concerns to the proposed variance. These concerns are summarized on this slide. First and foremost, they noted that there is no hardship to justify the variance since there is space inside the building. And as stated, reducing the usable floor area of the building could impact the future commercial adaptive reuse of the structure, which is promoted by the comprehensive plan. Secondly, the screen wall would block, or noted by the neighbor, the screen wall could possibly block the 13th or view along 13th Street. The screen wall will not block the view along 13th Street for traffic coming in and out of the alley to the north, which is right here, since it is located outside that clear vision triangle. I would also note that the subject property is located along the south or southwest side of the adjacent house. And as such, this should minimize the shading impacts on that property. And finally, the screen wall is located behind a large CMU wall, which should block the noise impacts as well. In conclusion, the planning team finds the variance complies with the required findings as per code. Thank you, and recommends approval.
Okay, all right. Thank you, David. Next, we will hear from the applicant. And Kristen, would 10 minutes do it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kristen Coulter, 6426 North Hillsborough Place. I am working with my clients. They would like to put an ice cream shop in this building. Sorry here. Thanks. Let's see, my clients are seeking to renovate the former Bloom's Florist Shop, which was originally an office repair shop, as David told us. They would like to honor the history of the shop by maintaining the service bays and garage doors, switching them out for fully glazed insulated versions. On the corner of 13th and State Street, an awning and taller parapet will be added over the former service office, which will become the order counter. The first and second bays will contain the kitchen, dining area, and 2 shared ADA restrooms. The intent is to offer house-made toppings and desserts, which necessitates a larger kitchen area, taking up nearly half of the soft serve shop. The third bay will be rented to another tenant to make this project financially viable. The building and site are relatively small, necessitating a variance to place 2 enclosures in the rear setback. On the east side of the building, a 16 by 4 by 6 foot 2 tall CMU trash enclosure will be added. It will hold 95-gallon carts that will be wheeled to 13th Street for collection, and this plan has been approved by Public Works. On the west side of the building, another CMU enclosure will be constructed, which will conceal the new walk-in freezer. It will be accessed via a gate on the northern edge of the lot. The trash and walk-in freezer enclosures will not be located any further north than the existing building, thus not intensifying the variance. The enclosure will have a mural, which will help to discourage graffiti, and the clients are definitely open to allowing the homeowner to the north select a color for the side of the enclosure that faces their property, or we can wrap the mural around that side, whatever they prefer. I know in their letter to the city, they had also mentioned fear about kind of inviting more bad behavior into the area. And so the clients are fully committed to fencing the property however the city sees fit, and they will be installing security cameras around to further discourage bad behavior. I know they had also mentioned a fear of trash being thrown onto their property, and in this respect, the enclosure for the CMU for the walk-in freezer will be helpful in that it will provide a barrier for anything being tossed into their property, as well as kind of a noise buffer. It will kind of further keep people towards the State Street side as opposed to closer to the northern property. Granting this variance does not change the zoning of the property nor interfere with pedestrian connections. ACHD and the city of Boise are planning improvements to this corner, which again further cements the idea of locating the trash enclosure in that northwest corner so that it doesn't become affected by this future construction. So with that, I'm open to questions.
Okay, all right. No questions at the moment, Kristen, but sit tight. Might have a few for you here in a minute. Up next is Neighborhood Association. Mr. Hagan, come on up.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Eric Hagan, Nina, President and Planning and Zoning Chair. I live at 809 North 18th Street. The hardship is that they can't fit 2 spaces in this building without putting an accessory use in front of it. 13th Street, while being a side street, is a street, and it is another front to the property. The neighbor next door, it's his side yard. And his side yard, he's limited to screening or putting up a fence to 3 feet for that entire 20-foot of depth for the front yard. He can go to 6 feet after that. This is an 11-foot tall wall for an accessory structure in front of this building. I don't know any other projects that have allowed for an accessory structure to go in front of a building. The existing space, as I said, can definitely fit the area of the cooler, of the walk-in cooler inside of it. They would still have room for a small office. In my office building, there are plenty of offices that are about 200 square feet and they're used. So to say that they can't rent it out by putting the cooler inside, I feel is a step too far. So for those reasons, Nina is against this project and agrees with the next door neighbor for its concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hagan. Okay, we'll open this up for questions by the commission.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore, please.
So I think the biggest concern that I had in reading the staff report was, so the hardship is kind of placed by wanting to utilize that third bay, which I think is a great idea. But, so this particular restaurant or the, the use is saving that third bay because there's not enough space, or, and adding that accessory walk-in cooler because there's not enough space in the third bay. And so what happens when that anticipated use moves in and needs some more space and has to get a variance because they can't fit stuff in their small space too? So I guess my question, all that leading up to it is, do we kind of know what we're anticipating in that third bay? Is there a possibility that that could trigger another variance and more kind of encroachment into the neighbor's property?
Is that to staff?
It could be to staff,
or
or
the
it
applicant?
could probably be to the applicant, I think, because, I'm not sure that Mr. Moser can answer that.
The hope is that these could be kind of supportive businesses, so they might also kind of share that kitchen if they were to have any kitchen uses, or it would be something retail, kind of maybe the original idea that was floating around is that it could be kind of pop-up retail that would kind of go in and out with different vendors.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mooney, John, you have your hand up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for staff. Could you walk us through the variance approach that we take and how we don't necessarily continue an existing non-conformance, non-compliance, and specifically on the rear setback? Just kind of talk us through that.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the building, I think, is currently 1620. It's a relatively small structure. Back 70 some odd years ago, it was built along the rear property line, which is way predates code. What they're doing, or what they're requesting to do with this, is to add a walk-in freezer along that adjacent to 13th Street, and then screen it with a wall to basically screen it from the neighbors, and then try to make this look more like an addition, I guess. So for the hardship for the structure and its location, if that's what you're asking, it's more of the existing building. They're matching the existing building location there. There's really no other place for it to go if in the outside area, given the location of the building, how it was placed, and its small size. So if you're looking from that perspective of a hardship, it's the placement of the original structure, the size of the parcel, and it's sort of what we are looking for on this, which is it's a pedestrian commercial use. We want to continue it as a commercial use along State Street, which is arterial, and promote these type of things within the downtown business core. The one thing that's also needs to be considered with this is that they're right. The walk-in freezer could be located inside the structure, and it would probably have to go, given the floor plan they're laid out and what's happening there, probably into that third bay in the back end of it. So by doing that, you're going to have to basically, it's going to consume I don't know exactly how much square footage. I think the walk-in freezer in and of itself is 10 by 13 in size, but if you put it inside the structure, I don't know what building code requires. So it's somewhere between 130 square feet, maybe more, of that structure. Plus, you probably want to have to wall it off so the people staying or in there enjoying the restaurant aren't looking at the freezer per se. So that's going to probably consume a little bit more space, but that does take away from the usable floor area of the building. We're trying to preserve this structure as a viable commercial use moving forward, given its small size. And we don't want to basically take away more usable floor area from inside to accommodate it. That's so it'd be an exceptional circumstance in that aspect to promote its adaptability. That's kind of at least my thought processing behind this.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So follow up for staff then. So this particular applicant is obviously an ice cream shop, which needs a freezer. A future commercial activity in that building may or may not need a freezer. So this entire argument kind of weakens. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, you are correct. This is a restaurant that does require that freezer area. Without the freezer or some sort of refrigerator unit, then the building would be limited to more of a straight retail type of use and not food service.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Zahab?
Chairman, I
Yeah.
have a question. You know, as I read through the information, you know, one thing that it talks about is that that third bay would be used for another business, and that would help the soft serve be profitable. And so my question to staff is, how often do we prioritize profitability when we are looking at these? Because that freezer could go in. It just means that there's the potential that an additional business wouldn't
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I wasn't really thinking towards that end. I don't know what their intention is with the third bay. I was just trying to preserve floor area for future adaptive reuse of the structure and not take away to put other utilities in. That's just my thought on it. I don't know. I'm not a commercial real estate broker per se, so I don't know what a retail or even a restaurant would need to be effective for floor area. But I realize that reducing it by any more than the existing structure, would probably impact would impact the ability for its adaptive reuse. And then the structure may sit for a long time because nobody could use it. And that's just what my fear is. I don't know I'm not here to promote the profitability of the neighbor or of the applicant. I'm just looking out toward the future and what could happen with the structure.
David, in our packet, page 157, site plan from the applicant. City agrees, they're taking the side yard setback on 13th Street from the curb line, correct?
That is correct. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct. The PC zone allows them to measure their setback from curb line.
Okay, and so the city agrees that the variance request does not apply to the side yard setback. It only applies to the rear yard setback, which most of the building lies in the rear yard setback as it is, correct?
Mr. Mr. Chair, commissioners, that is correct. The PC zone, that's exactly accurate. And the PC zone always anticipated, and what it's trying to do is create that pedestrian environment. So the zoning and the setbacks were designed to push the building up to the sidewalk.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Kristen, a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. The cooler, I wasn't quite clear from the drawings. Does it have a roof? Is it just like walk-in cooler without a roof? How does that work?
So the walk-in cooler is a box unit,
Okay.
and then the enclosure that we're building is just walls. That itself does not have a roof.
Okay, terrific. And then do you have any sort of study or expectation on like noise output from this freezer? Since it's not
funny,
not a covered structure.
Correct. So I asked the manufacturer, they were unable to provide me with that data,
Okay.
but from what I understand or what they could tell me was that it kicks on, it's not a consistent hum or sound. It's really on hotter days or after someone has entered that freezer. So the idea would be that they would get deliveries directly, probably in off hours. So in the morning when it's not hot, and then it would be pretty sufficient for the day.
Okay. Okay. And then two other quick ones. Is there a fence on the north property line? What's on the property line now? Is there a fence there
There's
currently?
a chain link fence that is, I think, 3 feet tall, maybe
Okay.
a little taller. And that goes to a certain extent. And then I believe there is a wood slat fence, maybe in the northeast corner along the north property line.
Okay. And you mentioned in your testimony, I don't believe there's a fence line, a fence proposed, or maybe there is, I apologize, in your site plan. But you mentioned in your testimony that the owner is on board to potentially provide new fencing on that property line?
Correct.
Okay, great. And then last but not least, there's no comments from ACHD in this application. The intention right now is that the driveway approaches on State and 13th Street would remain open and active, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore?
On the fence, so I think Mr. Hagan brought up a really good point. So this is the former Blooms, or this property's rear property line. You could have a fence 6 feet high, the whole deal. But the adjacent neighbor, it's a side yard, so it has to set back. Which could the fence for this, on this particular property, would that be 6 feet the whole way back because it's considered the rear fence?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it's an odd thing in the sense that it depends on who's building the fence. It's weird because it is a side fence for the adjacent neighbor to the north. So theoretically, they would be limited if they were constructing it to a 3-foot, so 3-foot solid or 4-foot chain link in the first 20-foot setback, in the 20-foot yard setback. And we run into this all the time, even in residential neighborhoods where somebody has a front yard next to a side yard, or, so I don't have a good answer other than who's building the fence.
Okay.
That's the best I can do. It's an odd thing.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Sorry, Kristen, I got one more for you. I'm just curious, did you entertain locating the cooler on the east side of the building along with the trash enclosure? It does appear there might be space on that side of the building. So I'm just curious on that.
We did entertain that, and we decided not to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, accessing that from the kitchen, which is in the northwest corner, kind of going through either the dining space or outside to get to the freezer just didn't seem like the best setup. The third bay, because we need an egress door, that will actually be accessed from the east side. And so we wanted to leave that kind of open so that that entry could occur.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, final call. Any more questions? Okay, very good. We'll go ahead and open up this item for public testimony. Anybody I had a few people sign. Mike Burnett, is that right? Yeah, come on up, please. Burkett, excuse me. Start with your name and address, please. You'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Mike Burkett, I own property at 512 North 13th Street, which is 2 buildings over from this property. I live at 1938 North 17th Street in the north end. And I also know Mr. Jones, who is absent and unable to attend tonight, but I know he has submitted information, which I think I agree with almost every one of those points. But the main point here is undue hardship. And it's undue hardship for a commercial use, not for these specific people to make their project viable. It's not a hardship that's going to make their project viable. This board, this decision-making body or the city council is not responsible for the economic viability of this project. It's just an inappropriate thing to be looking at, quite frankly. Renting the bay to another tenant, and then we found out, is it really undue? Well, you could move. It sounds like the kitchen's going to be in the northwest corner. If you put it in the south or northeast corner, you could move the cooler over where it's protected and not visible to a historic block. You could, what was the other? Anyway, both reasons for wanting to have it in that corner close to 13th Street instead of the other corner, which is protected by other buildings, are things that could be solved just like that. It's not undue at all. In fact, it's very solvable sort of a problem that they have, viability problem. Likewise, if their project isn't viable without renting out some space to another business, that's getting real close to not being viable. You know, it's just a high risk project. There's no drive-through called for. There's limited parking. The other ice cream vendors, which are just a block away, have drive-through. They have cars backed up like 4 or 5, even more so often in a hot summer day. And how can this project be viable when they can't have that drive-through aspect with cars backed up? Are they going to be backed up out into State Street? Down at 14th Street, that ice cream vendor, they back up. When they go all the way out, they back up into 14th Street. That's not viable for this intersection, this 13th and State Street intersection, which is very, very busy, and there's accidents there just about almost once a week. I mean, there's just accidents at that intersection all the time. And then the main thing that I want to bring to the commission is my building is a historic building, and the building next to it is historic. They're kind of sisters. They're 2.5 stories high. Mine has a turret built out of sandstone, local sandstone, and they are very historic in nature. Across 13th Street is the White Savage building, which is historic. Those buildings were built for the workers and the managers who built the New York Canal when this city was just getting started. They have a substantial historic value. Having a metal box facing 13th Street right next to these historic buildings is inappropriate when you have a block. We're not in the neighborhood association. We have a block where the current owners have tried to keep that historic aspect going.
Okay.
We'd like you to protect that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Burkett. Okay, anyone else in person like to testify? Man, it's like the 3rd time I've hit that mic tonight. Goodness. So what happens when I take an hour-long break in the back of the room? Yeah, please. And there is no one online, so.
Okay.
For this
Katie
item.
Forson, I live at 2424 West Spring Mountain Drive. I'm the owner of 1220 West State Street. And I just wanted to say a couple comments in support of the variance. Most notably, you know, when my husband and I considered purchasing the property, we felt like it's sitting there vacant and that it is not being utilized to its full potential. We were actually drawn to its charm and its potential. And so we think that our intent with the property is supportive of the comprehensive plan's intent to support adaptive reuse. We would like to maintain the facade and enhance the aesthetics of the building. And so the outdoor freezer will support both the ability to start a vibrant business there and also contribute to the community feel and the general vibe, I guess, of the surrounding area. So thank you for kristen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last call. All right. Kristen, this is now time for applicant rebuttal. I assume 5 minutes will probably do it for you. Okay.
Just to address some of the points that the neighbors brought up, certainly we don't want to detract from the aesthetics of the area. That's the last thing that we want to do. And that's kind of the reason for this enclosure, is so that we don't have this silver box being visible from anywhere. And so building the enclosure, putting a mural on it hoping to add to the aesthetics, not detract from it. Obviously, the style of our building is very different from the neighbors, and regardless of if we build the enclosure or not, the look will be different. It just is. But we're hoping that it will increase the aesthetic value of the building and really become an asset to the neighborhood. Even if we were to redesign the floor plan and switch the kitchen to the northeast corner, we would still need a variance because we would have to locate that freezer still in that rear setback. And at that point, I'm not certain if we could fit that and the trash enclosure. So we're stuck. So we thought that putting the freezer in the northwest corner, having that be a buffer between the neighboring property and ours so that noise wasn't a problem, we thought that that was kind of our best solution.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and bring this item back before the commission to render a decision. Again, we are discussing CBA 23-26. Any takers? Some discussion, perhaps? Kick us off.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore, please.
I'll take you up on the discussion.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit torn. I think in my knee-jerk reaction is there's extra space in that bay, granting the variance. It could, that other space is very small. Do we just open up for more variances? Is this property just so small that, if one user needs a variance, what about two? On the other hand, I think Mr. Moser's kind of reasoning and logic is very, it's reasonable. I know that this building has sat vacant for 1, 2, 3 years. So it's sat vacant for a while. And now we have somebody who's interested in using it and activating that corner. And maybe the building does need variance in order to make that work. So I'm not sure, which one is the one that makes the most sense in this case. And if we say no, is it just going to sit vacant for another few years until somebody else comes by asking for a variance? So that's kind of where I'm standing, and I don't know the answer.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. I think we're all struggling a little bit. Yeah. Esther, please.
Chairman, yeah, I kind of agree with Commissioner Moore. The part that I'm struggling with is that the application or the applicant has stated that the third bay will be rented to another tenant to make this project financially viable. And that is why I asked Mr. Moser if we consider profitability when we are looking at these applications. And in my viewing and listening to this board prior to me coming on board, I don't recall that that was a factor. And so I'm really struggling. The application before us is for a business and the variance, not for a business and potentially an extra space over here for another business that we have no idea about. So, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mr. Chair.
Fair enough. Thank you. Yeah, John, please.
Yeah, to further discussion a little, I agree with what's been said thus far. And one of the things that I was kind of doing the number crunching on is I also kind of cued on those financially viable comments from the applicant as well as economic feasibility but Mr. Moser's argument is very compelling as well about the adaptive reuse and activating that corner and what's best for the city. I get all that. It's the undue hardship part that's tough. And if the freezer is 130 square feet, and let's just call it 150 with walls and all that, that's like 10% of the total building space that we're talking about. So those were numbers that I was hanging my hat on as far as, okay, is this an undue hardship or not?
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Please, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way as the rest of the commission does really on this. That third bay spot is only 430 square feet. And so, I mean, like the likelihood of leasing that out is probably closer to the Nunsky than the Slimsky side, in my judgment. And so I'm not certain. The building is also so small that I don't know how you're going to get an occupancy over. My goodness. I guess why we would have 2 restrooms in a building that's not going to require, I don't think that I'm not an architect, but I don't think we're going to require 2 restrooms on a facility that small. So yeah, I look at 430 square feet that probably isn't really saleable in the market and 130 square foot freezer. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's a big square building. You know, that's Commissioner Gillespie is pretty fond of mentioning that when we talk about variances. And yeah, I get the economic development side of things. That's my trade, but I don't know. This is a tough one.
Okay. Yeah, all fair points. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one for sure, right? Where we're meeting the setback on the side yard in this particular parcel. So it's just a matter of whether or not we're comfortable proceeding with the variance on the rear yard setback. It is not a large building. You don't have a very large service area, dining area, ordering area as it lays out. So I think the commission has to be comfortable with, should the owner not be able to rent the third bay becomes additional ordering area, service area for the use, right? Should we proceed with the application as it's drawn? I tend to be in favor of the variance request, just where as I sit right now. I agree with staff's summary. I appreciate the adaptive reuse of the building. I think there are a few things that probably we could condition to maybe make it a little bit more palatable, potentially adding a roof or shade structure to the top of the enclosure, simply to help with maybe some of that heat gain, solar gain, maybe limiting some of the noise that the freezer could emit. I think certainly a fence along the property line, 6-foot privacy fence would be palatable to assist with the neighbors. So I tend to agree with staff and their summary of the question at hand, which is the variance request in the rear yard setback. Again, we're looking at a building, it's adaptive reuse. It's, you're looking at an area of the building that's currently derelict concrete and the gas meter and maybe a window, right? A little bit of fenestration on that side. So you're not really losing much from a building facade perspective in my mind, and you're gaining some more privacy to the north and hopefully making the building a little bit more presentable from the main street corridors. So that's where I tend to be. Unfortunately, where I sit, I can't actually make the motion though. So I'm here to entertain any motion that you guys all would like to proceed with.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Mooney.
I'll take a stab at it. I motion that we deny CVA 23-00026 primarily for not the reasons in the staff report, but for the fact that there is no undue hardship associated with the property itself.
Okay, we have a motion to deny.
I'll second.
With a second, a motion to deny by Commissioner Mooney with a second by Commissioner Seha. John, any other discussion?
I stated it before, but I agree with the staff's rationale about adaptive reuse and your discussion about it. But balancing it against taking up interior space, which could easily be done, and sticking with a single business interior to the building, I think is reasonable. And there's not an undue hardship with this parcel that requires the variance in my judgment based on the code.
Okay. Any other discussion, any other comments?
I guess maybe I just want to reiterate, I mean, the reason why I support the motion to deny is because similar to Commissioner Mooney, I don't feel that I mean, yes, you can look at adaptive reuse or adaptive use, but when I look at undue harm, it's not super clear to me. And again, going back to a very specific statement provided by the applicant indicating that that third bay will be rented to another tenant to make this project financially viable. If they are seeking a variance because they want that third bay available for a third party, that to me is not undue harm.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore?
I was just about to make the motion go in a different direction. So I think you convinced me. I'm not going to be in support of the motion because I agree with you that there are ways to mitigate some of the issues that we're seeing, and that's kind of part of the whole approval criteria. So I'm not in support of the motion because I think your idea is, the fence and, adding some sort of roof structure to maybe shield some of that noise a little bit more. I think that could help. And and that helps to kind of preserve some of the interior space, kind of where Mr. Moser was really, I think that's been his primary focus, is preserving interior space. And if we've got mitigation methods, then having that available retail space, maybe that helps keep this building occupied as opposed to just sitting vacant for longer, as long as we can mitigate those issues. I think that's my biggest concern, and I think those are good ideas, so I'm not going to support the motion.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, Chris, or should I call the vote? We'll call it. Okay. We have a motion to deny CVA 23-26 with a motion by Commissioner Mooney and a second by Commissioner Seha. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Schaefer,
No.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
No.
Mooney,
Aye.
Seha,
Aye.
3 in favor, 2 opposed, motion carries.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Good luck. Yeah. All right. I'm assuming we're okay to press on to the next item, team? Okay. Very good. All right. Let's move on to item number 3. This is CUP 23-61 MJY Group Incorporated at 8521 West Franklin Road. A conditional use permit for a drive-up establishment associated with a financial institution on 0.71 acres in a C4D zone. First, we're going to hear from staff, Matt Dennis.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The item before you is a conditional use permit for a drive-up establishment associated with a financial institution to be located at 8521 West Franklin Road on 0.71 acres in a C4D, which is planned commercial with design review zone. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing restaurant on site in order to develop a new Bank of America building with a drive-through. The proposal complies with the dimensional standards of the development code, as well as the use standards for drive-throughs. As required, the location of the drive-through lanes and window are positioned to the rear or south of the building, which allows for direct pedestrian access from Franklin Road. It is accessed from the shared parking lot to the south, rather than Franklin Road, and will not cause an increase of commercial traffic into the surrounding properties. as the queuing lanes is the queuing lane is of sufficient length to accommodate the anticipated peak demand. Recommended conditions of approval are summarized on your screen. These include incorporating detached sidewalk with class 3 street trees along the perimeter of the site, widening the southern landscape buffer to 10 feet in order to comply with the required rear parking setback of the C4 zone, revising the location of the solid waste enclosure, and to submit an arborist report with required tree mitigation calculations. As conditioned, the proposal complies with the development code and is supported by multiple goals, principles, and policies within the comprehensive plan as discussed within the project report. In conclusion, the planning team recommends approval, and I will stand for any questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. Next, we'll hear from the applicant.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Commissioner, Planning Commission. My name is Eric Wernett. My address is 28116 67th Avenue Northeast in Stanwood, Washington. So out of state.
All right. Welcome.
I am the owner's representative and senior project manager for Bank of America. So I'm the official representative. I will turn this over to my architect, Avtar, with Gensler here momentarily. I did want to ask for your approval based upon the condition of not accepting condition number 2 of the site-specific approval, which is the offset of the 10-foot sidewalk and right-of-way improvements. But we'll get to that here momentarily. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Avtar.
Okay.
Good evening, Chairman. And good evening, Commission. My name is Avtar Singh. Again, 4675 MacArthur Boulevard, Newport Beach, California. I'm outsider too, but been loving here. Thank you for all your hospitality. Been working with the City of Boise Planning and Zoning Department for the last eight months, and it's been pleasure. Very happy to work with Matt and very helpful. And we've been working with them, and as you know, this property already has a restaurant which we are trying to demolish and create this new building. It's around 4285 square feet, new Bank of America. This new Bank of America is pushing into new markets, so this will be the first bank in Idaho. So, and they choose by Boise as the first bank for their launching. So this is a pilot project. And like I mentioned, we've been working with zoning and planning department, and we are your guest, and we want to make sure that we agree with whatever you are looking for. And most of the condition, as I mentioned, all the condition we work with the city, we agreed with, and we're gonna comply with each one of them. One of the condition which, like we mentioned, Eric mentioned the detached sidewalk, and that we have some legal and financial implication because of that, because we don't lease, we are leasers, we are not own the property. So there is some discussion going on with the landlord and all those things. So it's making us hard to agree with that condition. Eric can also give a more detailed outlook from the land owner side. Again, like we are very happy to be here, and we will comply with most of all your conditions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. You guys still have a few more minutes for any more comments or presentation before we get into our deliberation. So if you had any other final comments or thoughts here?
Yes, absolutely. In regards to the hardship on the right-of-way improvements, currently there's all right-of-way improvements are currently in place. It matches the surrounding area. Because of change in code and desire, you're wanting to have the sidewalk be set back. What's a hardship for us is no other development in the recent couple of years have had to make those improvements. Further, the Audi dealership that is directly across the street that is currently under construction is not having to do right-of-way improvements. So if we're still held to that standard to make the right-of-way improvements, we would be the only one for miles up and down the road. As I've looked at satellite imaging of the surrounding businesses, I think that the building placement would be prohibitive for other neighbors to implement the same right-of-way improvements. So if we make those improvements, we would solely be the only ones up and down Franklin. So it's tough to kind of say why are we the only ones? So definitely a hardship for me.
Okay.
And as Avtar noted, this is going to be an expansion market for Bank of America. We're looking at between 8 to 15 locations throughout Boise. So we're really excited to get in here, add this facility to one of our 3,900 locations and have 16,000 ATMs nationwide. The drive-through that is triggering the CUP is just strictly going to be ATM access. This is not going to be for teller access. So it's just for convenience for customers. So,
Okay.
Perfect.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Okay. I don't think we have anyone from the Neighborhood Association present. So we'll go ahead and open this up for questions by the commission.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So I think it's just the right-of-way improvements that are really a question. It seems pretty typical to require right-of-way improvements, and sometimes you have to get a license agreement with ACHG. Is that kind of the proposal here? Is a license agreement with ACHG in order to do the right-of-way improvements?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, that's exactly correct. Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Mooney, please.
just a question for staff regarding the applicant's mention of the properties across the street that have recently redeveloped. Can you discuss his claim that there's no right-of-way improvements over there?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mooney, so not having any prior knowledge to what exactly was permitted across the street, and just now learning of construction going on over there. There's certain nexuses that are tied to when the city can and can't impose certain conditions. With a conditional use permit, there's more of a nexus to, and with an entire redevelopment of the site for that fully comprehensive redevelopment, including public infrastructure, things like that. So without that prior knowledge, I can't exactly speak to what permit was approved within that Audi dealership and what conditions of approval, if there even was a planning application within that. So the next point being with this zone, including a design review overlay, the nature of the conditional use permit kicked into the requirement for an external modification for design review application to be required subsequently to the conditional use permit as well. Within the streetscape standards, those detached sidewalks are required. So in order to, as previously mentioned, but in order to align with the conditions of the current CUP with what will be conditioned within the design review application, the city just took the stance to consolidate those and for clarity.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Follow up.
Please, John.
So as properties redevelop along this corridor along Franklin, the city's obviously trying to make it more pedestrian friendly with the detached sidewalk. So if parcels on either side of this application come up for redevelopment, what will happen with their streetscape?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Danley, Commissioner Mooney, sorry.
He's smiling. You're okay.
So to answer your question about redevelopment, because I'm not in the design review team, I can't exactly speak to when a design review application would be required. Obviously, it would be required for external modifications to sites that are within the design review overlay. But to answer your question, yes, if in a hypothetical situation, if the eastern or western neighbors decided to redevelop, they would go through a design review application that would require 10-foot detached sidewalk, 10-foot wide sidewalk. And that's the reason for that is because the modern zoning code, which was adopted in December of 2023, increases streetscape standards. So it would be the reason why the sidewalk along Franklin would be increased to 10 feet wide instead of 5 feet, which is 5 feet, 5-foot wide sidewalk would be required by the legacy zoning code.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure thing. Either. Okay. We good? All right. Okay, thank you, staff. Thank you, applicant. We'll go ahead and check in if anybody would like to testify on this item tonight. The podium's free. There is no one online. So that was quick. And so at this point, the applicant gets some time for rebuttal. Yeah, I would hope a couple minutes would do it.
Yes. I understand staff's direction, and if there's one of the adjacent properties does want to redo the property. However, there's a Panera and a McDonald's on both sides of us. Both of those are fairly new. I believe that they're within the last year or two. So it's going to be a very, very long time before they would be able to go through and redevelop. Other businesses along Franklin Road, I think that they're fairly new. And again, I think it would be a very long time before anybody goes in and redevelops to implement that. Secondly, the sidewalk and having the separated sidewalk is the bigger heartburn, where we went ahead and we've adjusted to account for the digital landscape. So we are putting in landscape. Part of the review process, they asked for additional street light. We're going to put in the street light. So we're doing everything else that was requested of us. We just don't want to tear out the existing right of way to replace if nobody else on the street is doing that. So,
okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead and bring this back before the commission to render a decision. Again, this is item number 3, CUP 23-61.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard, please.
I move that we recommend approval of the CUP, and yeah, with the condition of removing that number 2 to build that sidewalk, and I will leave it at that and see if we get a second.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve CUP with the modification to remove the condition requiring a detached sidewalk. Is that correct, Chris?
Correct.
Okay. Do I hear a second? And do not hear a second.
Can we open it up for discussion then?
Yeah, I think that's sure. Let's open up for discussion.
All right, then I'll kick this off.
Okay.
This is, in the last 4 years, this has become, I think, something that I actually wish I would get to spend more time on. This is for the people who live on that side of town, this is a gateway corridor. And we've heard this over and over again, at least in my last 4 years over here, about what we build and what we approve along these corridors like Overland and Franklin. And if we want to have corridor improvements, doing it piecemeal like this is the absolutely wrong way to ensure that we will have any kind of sensible streetscape for the residents of Boise. I've objected to this in the neighborhoods because it doesn't make any sense. And I definitely object to starting to tear Franklin apart and hanging it on a tenant rather than the property owner. And we just have this janky 10-foot weird detached sidewalk connected miles and miles and miles down Franklin where we already have a 5-foot attached sidewalk. That doesn't make any sense to me why we would do something like that. if we are going to make improvements to the streetscape on Franklin, that is a major long-term thing that needs to be coordinated by multiple agencies and not done piecemeal by us or by city council on a street as significant as Franklin. And so that's my rationale for saying this is absolutely the wrong way to achieve a sensible streetscape for the people in West Boise.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments or motion to proceed?
All right, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Moore, please.
I think we're all standing in. I move that we approve CUP 23-61 for the reasons stated in the staff report with all the conditions as stated in the staff report.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Moore. I have a motion to approve as written. Do I have a second?
Second that.
Okay, a second by Commissioner Seah. Thank you, Esther. Jennifer, any discussion to
Sure.
start us out?
Sorry, Commissioner Blanchard. So I think for me, the biggest thing that stands out was, I think a couple of years ago, there was an application on Broadway and they were requesting to modify the required detached sidewalk for an attached sidewalk. And, there was some discussion about it and we ended up not doing that and doing the detached sidewalk. And I think some of the reasoning from the applicant was, Broadway is mostly attached sidewalks. If we do this, then it's going to be detached this little section and it's attached the rest of the way. And, the next commission hearing or maybe one or two later, there was the adjacent parcel was coming in before us with a detached sidewalk. And if we had approved the first parcel with an attached sidewalk, we would have just made that condition worse for decades to come. And so that's kind of always stuck in my mind as a really good example of approving detached sidewalks, even when it looks like the whole road's been developed. And even when it looks like those are it's new development, because of cases like that, you never know what's going to develop next. And, a restaurant, Panera may no longer exist for whatever reason, something may happen to it and it would redevelop. And so I think for me, giving up that detached sidewalk is just something that I'm not willing to do just based on my experience. Just in this commission. And I think that's the direction the city is wanting to go. That's the recommendation of the staff. That's the street section and the sidewalk section that they have recommended for this particular property.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Any other discussion? John, any comments? You good?
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Commissioner Blanchard had me convinced. Thank you, Chris. That was a compelling argument. But the reason I didn't press unmute is I was listening to everything because I was torn on this. And I got to go with Commissioner Moore and in support of this. And for another reason that hasn't been brought up, the whole reason we have detached sidewalks is pedestrian safety. And so if there was an accident on Fairview in front of the Bank of America and it was an attached sidewalk, we, the city, would not feel good about not having conditioned a detached sidewalk as we have proposed here. I agree with the staff on this one.
Okay, thank you, John. Gentlemen, nice job on the application. It looks good. Welcome back to the market here in Boise. Everything looks great. I will also be supporting the motion for the reasons stated by Commissioner Moore, Commissioner Mooney. I understand. You're absolutely, we understand where you're coming from. We spend an inordinate amount of time talking about detached sidewalks at this commission. But at the end of the day, the city's been quite clear, quite consistent over the years. I've been on the commission for 4 years now. Going back to the legacy zoning code, the new zoning code, the city's been very consistent that we are in a detached sidewalk mode of development in this city. As Commissioner Mooney stated just now, primarily for pedestrian safety. Now, we're on Franklin Road. It's a high volume road, a lot of traffic. If there's a place to do a detached sidewalk in this town, it's on Franklin Road, right by the mall. Hopefully, as these other parcels redevelop over the coming years, we get more pedestrian activity out here. I would love to see some sort of residential developments nearby the mall as well to make the arguments for the detached sidewalks even stronger, right? Going one step further, I'm a landscape architect. To build the detached sidewalks, you're going to take out some relatively mature, very nice honey locusts, right? Now, that pains me, but at the end of the day, the pedestrian safety kind of trumps that. So again, welcome. The rest of the application looks great. We're very happy to hear that you're in agreement with that, with the rest of the conditions. So all the best moving forward. Okay. You bet. Thank you. We'll go ahead and call the roll real quick. Again, this is CUP 23-61. Motion to approve by Commissioner Moore with a second by Commissioner Seha.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Blanchard,
No.
Moore,
Yes.
Mooney,
Yes.
Seha,
Yes.
4 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Good luck. Okay. I assume we're okay to press on to our final item, team? Okay. All right. Last but not least tonight is item number 5, PUD 23-29. HECO Engineers at 3822 West Lemhi Street, a conditional use permit for a residential planned development comprised of 7 single-family units on 1.1 acres in R1C zone, and then the associated subdivision, which is SUB 23-42 at the same address, preliminary plat comprised of 7 buildable and 2 common lots on 1.1 acres in an R1C zone. Mr. Matt Dennis, again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The item before you is a conditional use permit for a planned residential development comprised of 7 single-family units and a preliminary plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 7 buildable and 2 common lots located at 3822 West Lemhi Street on 1.1 acres in an R1C single-family residential zone. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing single-family home on site and accessory structures in order to develop the 7-unit subdivision, nearly maximizing the allowed density of the lot. The subdivision will take access from Lemhi Street via a private road with attached sidewalk on both sides. Lemhi Street will also be improved with curb, gutter, and detached sidewalks with street trees. The proposal utilizes the PUD in order to allow for minor deviations from the development code, including reduced interior lot sizes and reduced internal front setbacks of the northern lots. PUDs greater than 1 acre are required to provide a minimum of 2 amenities. In this case, the project proposes a picnic area with 5 bike parking spaces on one of the common lots, as well as a recommended condition of approval to revise the landscape plan to include drought-tolerant landscaping to comply with this amenity requirement. The recommended conditions of approval are summarized on your screen. These include additional perimeter landscaping, the installation of no parking signs on one side of the private road, the installation of a 5-foot detached sidewalk with a 10-foot wide landscape buffer and Class 1 street trees due to the presence of overhead power lines, as well as delineating a crosswalk at the private road's intersection with Lemhi Street. As conditioned, the proposal complies with all dimensional requirements of the development code and is supported by multiple goals, principles, and policies within the comprehensive plan, as was discussed within the project report. Public comment was received after the deadline to receive late correspondence, in which a neighbor expressed concerns regarding building efficiency and quality of construction, stating that robust insulation and quality mechanical ventilation, when implemented, can make homes more comfortable and more affordable, which aligns with the city's climate goals. In conclusion, the planning team recommends approval of the PUD and subdivision, and I will stand for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Next, we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the commission. Just basically summarize, we're proposing
Sorry, could we get your name and address, please?
Kevin Flores, 5100 West Bellevue Street.
You can crank that all the way up if you want there. There you go.
I'm up here, huh?
Yeah, there you go.
We're requesting a conditional use permit for the residential plan development. It's going to be 7 single-family units, 2 common lots. The biggest thing that we're requesting is the setback requirements and the density requirements of the lot will be consistent with the the neighborhood of the surrounding neighborhood and infill property. It's going to be consistent with the density of the surrounding neighborhood. In addition, providing amenities, one of which being landscaping and landscaping across the frontage of Limhi. That landscaping is going to hope to improve the neighborhood. Currently, there exists 1 single shed and 1 single house. We believe that improving this neighborhood with single-family housing that is consistent with the rest of the neighborhood will only liven up the neighborhood and increase the value of the property. Stand in for any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Flores. Appreciate it. I think we'll just go ahead and move on to any questions by the commission because there is no one left to testify. Is there someone online, Crystal?
Mr. Chair, Mia Russell with the Neighborhood Association is online.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. I just checked. Mr. Russell, you're representing the Vista Neighborhood Association? Ms.
Hi there. I'm actually not representing the neighborhood association tonight. We have not been able to come to consensus on this, so I was just going to speak as a neighbor of the property.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take your testimony in just a few minutes then. Sit
Okay.
tight if you would, please. Okay. Thank you, Crystal, for catching that. I apologize for missing her being online. Any questions by the commission? Just a couple of quick ones. Mr. Flores, just real quick. You are in agreement with the staff report, is that right? Correct. Okay. He responded in the affirmative for the record. And then Matt, I'll have to be honest, I wasn't quite following the public comments about building efficiency. Did I miss that in the packet, or was that the late correspondence we got was ACHD, correct? Okay.
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay.
That public comment was received Friday afternoon via email sent to Planning and Zoning Info. And that was almost verbatim of what I had included into the presentation.
Okay. All right. Very good. We'll go with
Mr.
that.
Chair?
then. Yeah, John, please.
So I got a question for Matt regarding staff, regarding condition 3 about the second amenity and the addition of the class 3 trees at the perimeter. So the landscape perimeter add, that's kind of confusing to me. I'm not that experienced, so I don't remember seeing this before. Chair may be able to help me as well.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mooney. So the requirement, the condition to install drought tolerant landscaping kind of satisfies that second amenity requirement. Separate from that, the class 3 trees along the perimeter kind of is a subdivision requirement for perimeter landscaping, buffering from the existing single family houses that back up to that.
Okay, so
Since,
Mr. Chair, follow up go ahead.
Oh, I just real quick, John, since you mentioned I might have some color there too. I actually do have some color on that. So my understanding in working with city forestry, especially under the new zoning code, is that they are encouraging more class 3 trees where applicable and appropriate. So that's sort of generally where city forestry staff, where their mindset is, right? So class 3 trees are the largest class of trees, and they're just trying to add to that the canopy and the variety of trees within the city by requiring a few more class 3s where appropriate.
Yeah, so I got a follow on then for staff or for you, Mr. Chair, which is, so if the city forester looks at those on the perimeter, will class 3 trees normally sit in a parcel setback on one of these single family parcels?
Matt, can you?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mooney, I'm sorry, I kind of missed that question. Would you mind rephrasing?
A mature class 3 tree, is it appropriate to put it in that setback area for perimeter landscaping?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mooney. So through streetscape standards, and through the Treasure Valley tree selection guide, the general rule of thumb is that class 3 trees need to have a 10-foot wide enclosure. So with being placed inside that setback, kind of in which the rear setback would be 15 feet, right? So that kind of gives that little bit of buffer between the property line and then internal to the parcels for those to be planted.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Yeah, and John, just to add on to what Matt said, I think that, for example, ACHD's requirements are a 10-foot planter strip. Like when you're in a detached sidewalk condition, I believe the requirement for ACHD, and I think the new zoning code is a 10-foot planter strip for a class 3 tree. So that would just help maybe give you a little bit of a sense of scale for growth requirements. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Very good. We'll go ahead. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Flores. And we'll go ahead and open this up for testimony. We have Ms. Russell online.
Hi there, my name is Mia Russell. I reside at 3825 West Lem High Street, which is just across the street from the proposed development. I wanted to offer support for this project. I think overall it's definitely going to improve our neighborhood. I especially like and appreciate that drought tolerant landscaping was brought up. I think that'll be a plus to our neighborhood as well. One topic I would ask for you to consider when you're looking at this project is the 2 amenities that are needed for the project, since it's in excess of 1 acre. The 2 proposed amenities right now are a bike rack and a picnic table. Both are great amenities. However, I would want to point out that all homes on the property have 2-car garages. And so a separate bike rack on a common lot might not get much use, and considering another amenity in its place might be better for the neighbors that will eventually be residing in those homes, maybe like a tot lot or things like that. I also have one ask for the developers, and that is that currently the lot has been unmaintained for years. There's old trees that have unfortunately died because they haven't been watered for 2 summers. The whole lot is covered in weeds, and neighbors have reported that they are having mice problems because of all the extra rodents that have moved in the weeds of the unmaintained lot. So I would ask that the developer maintain the site before as well as during construction in a way that is appropriate, and that would be appreciated by everyone in the neighborhood. But again, overall, I think it's a great project and I welcome it in the neighborhood. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Russell. And I believe that does it for our attendance this evening. Yes, staff? Okay. We'll go ahead and bring it back for the applicant for rebuttal.
Just responding to Mia's comment. So the amenities for the project will include, one of the amenities will be a bike rack and a picnic table, and then additional amenity will be the drought tolerant landscaping. So it'll be 2. The bike rack and the picnic table is kind of bunched into 1, with the drought tolerant landscaping being another one.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. We'll go ahead then and bring these items back before the commission to render a decision. We can do them both as one motion, or we can break them up, whatever the commission's pleasure. Mr. Chair. Commissioner Blanchard.
I checked with my magic 8-ball and it's saying that there's not going to be much contention here. So I'm going to put this out there. I move that we approve PUD 23-29, the conditional use permit for the planned residential development of 7 single-family homes, and the preliminary plat for the subdivision SUB 23-42. with all the conditions as written by staff.
Okay. We should probably note that it's a recommendation to approve the subdivision, correct, Chris?
Recommendation to approve the sub. Yes,
Great,
correct.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
A second.
Okay, second. All right, we got a motion to approve with a second. Any discussion?
The hour is late, but when I saw this project, I was amazed because we sat through contentious hearings over the modern zoning code, and everybody in the Vista Neighborhood Association and the surrounding bench neighborhoods were convinced that it was the end of the world, that it was going to be all multifamily housing in all of their single-family neighborhoods. And lo and behold, the first project that comes through in that neighborhood is 7 single-family homes. So I am glad that Mia Russell is encouraged. The other thing I think this points out is something that I hollered about during those hearings is that I hope the city is keeping track of what is happening with development applications in these neighborhoods. So that we can see, because this is definitely one for the scoreboard of, look, it's single family homes going into a single family home neighborhood and not a California developer building 60 apartments on an acre. So this is a great project. Congratulations.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore?
And just to add on to that, I think it's, a pretty straightforward project. The external setbacks are all consistent with the zone. The reductions to the setbacks are all happening internally. Reductions to the lot sizes are all internally, but overall the zone still comply, or the density still complies with the zone. So I have no issues with it as stated. Your 1 unit is fronting Lim High. I think it's a pretty straightforward, pretty good project, and it kind of consistent with the area. So.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? Yeah, I agree. I think it looks good. I wonder, I think Ms. Russell made, a fair point about some of the amenities. I wonder if perhaps we might entertain a friendly amendment to maybe rework the amenities to improve those a little bit. I don't disagree with Ms. Russell that one bike rack for for 7 single family homes is not going to be all that valuable of an amenity. And I could see that a tot lot might have some value in this condition. So, but as the person that is not the motioner, I would have to recommend a friendly amendment if you are so open to that.
Oh, sure, I'm open to it. Or I think we've got our intentions stated to the record, and because we're recommending
That's true.
Which well, let's see. No, we're recommending the sub and approving the PUD, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then the PUD is the one that has the amenities, correct?
Yeah, we could certainly separate them just quickly with unanimous consent. and go one at a time.
I think we just do a friendly amendment saying, I don't even know what the best way to do this would be. I mean, just, I mean, I hate to say, I mean, it could be a trash can, it could be a tot lot, it could be a post that you put, doggy bags on and a trash can. I mean, it could be any one of those things that would be useful, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe the kids are going to ride their bikes over and they want to lean them against something. I don't know. My kids just throw them in the sidewalk and they get run over, but, so I don't know. So I don't know about, I'm not too comfortable saying it got to be this or got to be that, but if there's some way that we can just say, we respectfully request the developer, I don't even know how you do it, consult with the neighbors on,
on the more valuable amenity, more useful amenity. Mary, we're just discussing, we have one motion to approve both items, recommend approval on the sub and then the PUD. But we're discussing a friendly amendment to the PUD.
And are there particular conditions that the motioner is asking to include in the recommendation to the sub? If not, I would put out there that it is possible to just go with the motion as stated and understand that the discussion has been on the record. It would not be holding the applicant to that, but has been the discussion. If there's a particular condition that you may want to add, then I would suggest potentially being more specific and or removing the motion and making the motion separately.
Okay, very good. Well, the subdivision does have to go to council, so that will be, discussed at that level. So Chris, if you're comfortable proceeding with this discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
For
I
the
think
record?
our intention's in the record here. Mr. Flores seems to be like, hey, whatever the neighbors want, we're doing this because it's what the city said. So, I mean, I think I agree with councilor's recommendation that we just plow on ahead, and I think things should settle out just fine, I would think.
Okay, very good. All right, we'll go ahead and call the vote then. Again, we have motion to approve PUD 2329 and a recommendation to approve SUB 2342. Motion was by Commissioner Blanchard and the second by Commissioner Moore.
Schaefer,
Yes.
Blanchard,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Mooney,
Yes.
Seha.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, thank you all. Good luck with your project. And we are adjourned.